Hey guys, tonight we're stepping barefoot into the greasy back streets of ancient Rome. Just as the sun dips behind crumbling rooftops and the air thickens with the tang of garlic, sweat, and something deeply fishy, you're hungry, confused, and probably underdressed for this whole 2 years ago situation. The clatter of wooden wheels on stone echoes down the alley, mingling with the shouts of hawkers selling snacks you can't pronounce and definitely shouldn't trust. A dog barks. A baby wails. Someone somewhere is roasting something that smells not entirely legal. You don't have much money, you don't speak Latin, and your stomach just growled loud enough to startle a flock of pigeons. The only certainty? You're about to get very familiar with what passed for fast food in the Eternal City. And here's the thing. Roman cuisine isn't all lavish feasts and silver goblets. Not for you. No, you're part of the 99%, the ones who lived by their nose and their coin purse, hoping both wouldn't betray them before sundown. You're in for fried dormice, mulled vinegar wine, maybe a fermented fish paste surprise. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and your local time. I love seeing how far this sleepy little journey goes. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge past a wall scribbled with ancient graffiti. Something about Marcus owing someone money and also being a donkey. Noted. To your left, a hunched vendor hollers while stirring a bubbling pot balanced precariously over a fire. The scent, hot oil, rosemary, and panic, lures you closer. Whatever he's cooking probably isn't regulated by any ancient health department. You pretend not to notice the cat sniffing at a tray of half-eaten dumplings. But this is Rome. Even junk food tells a story. The working class, soldiers, travelers, and pretty much anyone who couldn't afford a personal cook relied on the thermopolia, street-side food counters. Think of them as the ancient Roman answer to the drive-through, minus the convenience and basic sanitation. These counters, often embedded in brick walls, had deep round holes where large clay jars, dolia, sat sunken in, filled with hot food or wine. You're standing in front of one now. It's decorated with fading frescoes of fish and figs. A poor man's menu board. The guy behind the counter eyes you like you might bolt without paying. You ask what's fresh. He shrugs. Everything. Nothing. And definitely leftovers. And what are your options tonight? If you're lucky, lentils simmered in garlic and vinegar, stale bread soaked in wine, maybe a splintery skewer of meat that was once, optimistically, a bird. Historians still argue whether most thermopolia served full meals or just glorified snacks. But either way, it's hot, cheap, and not technically spoiled yet. There's no tipping, no hygiene score, just heat, smell, and survival. The guy slaps a wooden bowl onto the counter and ladles in something that might be stew. You sit on the nearest curb and try not to gag as your teeth crunch down on what might be a bit of bone or a generous helping of gravel. It's hard to tell. Roman street food was not known for finesse. Still, this is dinner. Your neighbors tonight are a boy in a tunic, a soldier half asleep on his feet, and an old woman muttering as she dunks bread into her wine. They're all eating. None of them look happy about it. And that's the real magic of Roman street food. It was the great equalizer. Whether you were a freedman with dreams of climbing the social ladder or a dock worker hoping not to die of hunger, you all ended up in front of the same bubbling pot of mystery stew at some point. Oh, and fun fact, most Roman homes didn't even have kitchens, not unless you were rich. So, street food wasn't just a luxury, it was necessary. People lived above shops or in cramped insulae, multi-story apartment blocks that were notoriously flammable and smelled like everyone was cooking socks. If you wanted hot food, you had to go outside and trust a stranger with your stomach. Which leads us to a weird little twist. Some historians think that, in some areas, food vendors were regulated more strictly than we assume. Others argue that most of them flew completely under the radar, serving up whatever they could scrape together before the local magistrate wandered by. No one agrees. Typical Rome. You glance back toward the thermopolium. A new customer shuffles up. He looks like he's been stabbed or maybe just had a long day. He orders something red, which immediately sizzles when it hits the pan. A delicious, terrifying sound. If you could read Latin, you'd see scrawled on the wall next to you, Lucius was here. He hated this food, and also owes Gaius denarii. Roman Yelp, basically. Let's not forget, while the elite held decadent banquets where they reclined on cushions and nibbled songbirds stuffed with honeyed hazelnuts, the rest of the population worked 16-hour days and hoped their dinner didn't include rodent. Oh, right, dormice. Technically a delicacy, but depending on your luck, you might find one at a lower-end stall, stuffed with herbs, roasted, maybe glazed with honey. You'd be surprised how many Romans actually enjoyed these little guys. There were even dormouse farms, with special terracotta jars that kept them sleepy and fat. You try not to imagine one scurrying across your lap right now. There's a rat in the alley. You pretend not to see it. As the night cools, the smells shift. More frying, more garlic. Someone nearby is roasting onions. Someone else is selling honeyed cakes, their scent cutting through the sourness of wine and sweat. For a moment, it almost feels cozy. And maybe that's the heart of it. For all its grit and grime, Roman street food meant you belonged to a living city. You ate with strangers, you bargained, you judged a man not by his toga, but by how much fish sauce he dumped on his lentils. This was your world, loud, smelly, unfiltered. And dinner was never more than a coin and a stomachache away. You wipe your hands on your tunic. You're still hungry, but you survived your first meal. Barely. You push yourself up from the stone step, your knees creaking like an old wooden cart. The bowl is empty now, though whether you actually finished the stew or spilled half of it down your tunic is hard to say. Either way, you're not exactly satisfied, just slightly more full and mildly concerned about that crunchy bit near the end. Probably not a tooth. Hopefully not yours. The street is dimmer now, flickering with oil lamps dangling from crooked posts and windowsills. The sun's final rays bounce off the polished marble of a senator's villa in the distance, completely ignoring the crumbling plaster tenement you just wandered out of. And now, you're on the hunt again. Not for treasure, not for glory, but for Rome's version of a late-night snack. And oh, are there options? The alley narrows as you shuffle forward, guided by sound and scent, the clang of metal ladles against ceramic jars, the sizzling of something oily hitting something hot. The sharp tang of vinegar cuts through the thicker haze of meat fat and sweat. You've found it. A row of thermopolia, street snack counters, crowded and glowing in the firelight like moth lures for the hungry. You lean in to see what's cooking. One vendor is ladling out boiled chickpeas, steamed until mushy and salted until you wince. Another has trays of tiny fried fish, bones and all, served in greasy bundles of reed paper. A third stirs a pot of something unidentifiable, greyish, steaming, bubbling, and vaguely threatening. These aren't restaurants, mind you. They're more like halfway stations between hunger and regret. The thermopolia weren't rare in ancient Rome. In fact, they were everywhere. Archaeologists have uncovered hundreds of them in places like Pompeii, frozen mid-service by that inconvenient volcano in CE. You'd see big L-shaped counters, marble-topped and inlaid with sunken dolia filled with food or wine, all ready to serve the city's fast-moving masses. Because when your life is a blur of labor, errands, and avoiding angry senators on litters, sitting down for a home-cooked meal just isn't in the schedule. You shuffle closer to a vendor frying what look like round cakes in oil. The sizzle alone is enough to make your stomach pitch forward in optimism. You ask what it is, and he says, "Libum, maybe." Maybe? You don't press the issue. He shovels one onto a slab of wood and hands it over. It's warm, pillowy, and slightly sweet. Cheese, honey, flour. You bite in. It's actually decent. You're stunned. Of course, not all stalls were created equal. Some sold hearty bean stews, grain porridge with chunks of fatty meat, or simple lentils flavored with garlic and vinegar. Others went the budget route. stale bread soaked in wine or milk, a few olives, and a hopeful sprinkle of herbs. Historians still argue whether these stalls were run by independent cooks, family operations, or part of a larger system of food vendors. The lack of menus, or receipts, makes it a messy topic. As you chew thoughtfully, you take in the real secret of Roman snack stalls. Everyone eats here. You spot a grizzled centurion sipping watered wine beside a giggling teenage girl with smudged eyeliner and half a fig pastry in her mouth. Behind them, a stoic donkey chews thoughtfully on a crate. The line between classes softens just a little when hunger knocks. Then again, the food itself often told a different story. Some stalls had a reputation. You'd avoid Milo's place because of that one time someone found a frog in the soup. The Greek's kitchen, though, people swore he had a way with cinnamon and goat. If you were lucky, you had a favourite stall. If you were really lucky, you didn't get dysentery. And yet there's something kind of magical about it all. You eat standing up, juggling a wax paper cone of fried chickpeas while avoiding a puddle of who knows what. The people around you are talking, laughing, slurping, shouting, life in full volume. Rome might have had its share of senators, emperors, and demigods, but the real engine of the city, it's these stalls, these streets, these midnight munchies. Fringe detail incoming. Some scholars believe Thermopolia were not just food joints, but also low-key social hubs, sort of like ancient Roman Starbucks meets dive bar. There are graffiti messages next to some counters, crude jokes, names, even love notes. It wasn't just about food, it was a place to loiter, to gossip, to fall in love, or at least flirt over a shared sausage skewer. Speaking of sausages, yes, Rome had those too. Spice pork, lamb, or even chicken, minced and packed into intestines, grilled until the fat popped and the ends curled. You spot a vendor flipping a row of them now, the aroma buttery and intoxicating. You ask for one. He hands it over with a flat stare and a grunted, "Don't drop it." You burn your tongue almost immediately. Worth it. Another stall over sells what might be the ancient Roman version of pizza, a flatbread topped with herbs, oil, sometimes anchovies or fig slices. It's chewy, greasy, and impossible to eat without oil dribbling down your arm. So naturally, you go back for seconds. A small crowd has gathered at the end of the alley. A boy is juggling olives. A man is shouting about boiled cabbage, though no one seems impressed. A stray dog noses around, hopeful. You sit on an overturned amphora, chewing on a honey cake so sweet your teeth buzz. For a moment, you could almost forget the chaos, the smells, the fact that you have no idea what time it is. But there's a beauty in that too. Time doesn't really matter here, not when you're full, warm, and watching oil shimmer under the lamplight. You yawn. You'll eat again soon. Maybe something a bit more adventurous, like that chilled fruit mush someone mentioned earlier. Or not. For now, you've eaten your fill of sidewalk slop, and Rome, in all its greasy, loud, wonderful grime, feels a little more like home. You shuffle away from the flickering lamplight of the last thermopolium, your fingers sticky with honey and olive oil, your sandals making a faint squelch against the uneven stones. Your tunic now smells of fried dough, vinegar, and mystery meat, which is somehow an improvement over earlier, when you mostly just smelled like fear and lentils. The streets are quieting now. Well, relatively. Rome never really sleeps, not, even in the lowliest districts. But the chaos begins to settle into a hum, and you find yourself drawn toward a wider avenue where the smells shift from sharp and savory to something softer, fruity, earthy, almost fancy. Because tonight, against all odds, you're headed to a pepina. Not as elegant as it sounds. A pepina was not a restaurant. Not exactly. Think dingy tavern with seating, wine, food, questionable clientele, and a 40% chance of someone passing out in the corner. The kind of place where you could sit down. Yes, sit down and have a hot meal with wine, even if you were just a merchant or a soldier or a gladiator with a mild concussion and a belly full of borrowed denarii. You slip through the low doorway. The air is warm, thick with steam and smoke. The scent of stewed fruit and roasted nuts curling around your head like a lazy snake. Clay lamps flicker in sconces on the wall. Someone's already yelling. Someone else is laughing. A third person appears to be trying to marry a wine jug. Perfect. You find a wooden bench near the back, brushing off crumbs from the last poor soul who sat here. The table is chipped, the floor sticky, and your neighbour is either asleep or just very good at pretending to be dead. Still, there's food coming. You can smell it. Sweet wine, spicy sausage, baked fruits, fried chickpea balls, maybe even a wedge of crumbly cheese. You just might be living the dream. Popinae weren't just eateries. They were microcosms of Roman social life. While wealthier Romans held their elaborate banquets at home, the working class gathered here to unwind, eat, argue, play dice, and drink watered wine until time stopped meaning anything. Food was secondary to the chaos. This was a place to vent, to gossip, to disappear into the warm haze of cheap Falernian knockoffs and deep-fried hope. Tonight, your server is a woman with one eyebrow and a visible disdain for your face. She slams down a dish of olives, a wedge of flatbread, and a cup of what might technically be wine. You thank her. She ignores you. The man next to you stirs and mumbles something about more goat, then goes right back to snoring. The olives are bitter, oily, and deeply addictive. The bread is warm and coarse, full of grain and purpose. You sip the wine. It's sharp, sour, probably cut with vinegar, but drinkable, just. And then the real food arrives. Chickpea pancakes, spiced with cumin and coriander. A dollop of fermented fish sauce, garum, sits on the side, its pungent tang assaulting. Your senses like a punch from a well-meaning uncle. Yes, let's talk about garum. This legendary Roman condiment was made by fermenting fish guts in salt under the Mediterranean sun for weeks, or months, or possibly centuries, judging by the smell. Historians still argue whether all garum was created equal. There were different grades after all. But one thing's for sure, the Romans were obsessed. Rich or poor, everyone had a jar of it, and they put it on everything. Think ketchup meets soy sauce meets regret. You try a dab on your pancake. You instantly understand why some ancient authors said it tasted like the sea but stronger. You also understand why some people may have kept small mint leaves nearby to chew afterward. Fringe scholars even suggest garum was used medicinally for ulcers, wounds, even as a laxative. Useful, if not delicious. The woman returns with a bowl of fruit stew, figs, dates, plums, simmered with honey and black pepper. It's cloyingly sweet, sticky, and oddly satisfying. You spoon it slowly, feeling your limbs relax. Around you, dice clatter on a board. Someone starts a lute solo that lasts 3 notes. Another patron starts explaining the plot of a play you didn't ask about, loudly. And just like that, the peppina draws you in. It's not luxurious, not refined, but it's alive. These people, this food, this noise. It's the beating heart of street-level Rome. You've eaten better, sure. But have you felt more Roman than this? Probably not. And here's a little twist. While these places fed the masses, Roman moralists absolutely hated them. Writers like Seneca and Juvenal whined endlessly about how Popinae corrupted youth, encouraged laziness, and were full of gamblers, prostitutes, and actors. Which, to be fair, sounds like a great Friday night. Their rants say more about their anxiety than the food. Still, some Popinae were raided, others regulated. It didn't matter. People kept coming. You glance around at your fellow diners. A pair of rough-looking men are arguing over a hunk of sausage. A woman with elaborate hair and even more elaborate eyeliner throws back her 3rd cup of wine. The server rolls her eyes and swats at a drunk trying to steal more bread. There's flour in the air, oil on your sleeves, and the fish sauce hasn't entirely stopped stinging your nose. But you're warm. You're full. And you've officially eaten your way deeper into Roman daily life. You rise, unsteady but content, nodding to the sleeping man beside you. He doesn't respond. You step over someone's sandal and ease back into the street, where the cool night air bites pleasantly at your cheeks. The stars are starting to blink through the haze. Someone's playing a flute nearby. The wind carries the scent of bread baking in some distant oven. You've eaten chickpeas, figs, olives, wine, and fermented fish goo, all without dying. It's been a good night. Rome may be grand and glorious in the history books, but down here, in the alleys and taverns, it's just a place where people eat and live and argue over sausage like anyone else. And that's the part you're starting to really understand. Your sandals whisper against the cobblestones as you ease back into the moon-drenched street, belly full and brain fogged slightly from that sharp, sour wine. You're still tasting the fermented fish sauce in the back of your throat, a ghostly reminder of Rome's idea of flavor. As you round the next corner, the din of the popina fades, replaced by the quiet murmur of city life winding down. But your night is far from over. There's one corner of Roman food culture you haven't yet dared explore: dessert. Or at least what passed for dessert in a city obsessed with conquest, sewage engineering, and highly opinionated poetry. A small cartwheels past, pushed by a boy barely tall enough to see over the handle. He's hawking something sweet, the scent of honey and nuts swirling in his wake. You follow, because of course you do. Curiosity is stronger than caution. And besides, your sweet tooth is wide awake and demanding answers. The cart creaks to a stop near a fountain where a cluster of insomniacs is already gathered. The boy begins handing out treats, fritters dripping with honey, candied dates skewered on sticks, and what looks like miniature cakes wrapped in leaves. You approach, hand him a coin, and receive a still warm round of something golden and sticky. You bite in. It's deep-fried dough soaked in honey, maybe sprinkled with sesame seeds. Think proto-donut. Think heaven. Turns out, ancient Romans had an entire category of sweets designed to be served after meals or during festivals. Globuli, little balls of cheese and flour, fried and doused in honey. Dulcia domestica, dates stuffed with nuts and pine kernels, sometimes dusted with sea salt. Even placenta, a layered honey cheese pastry that sounds more like a biology lecture than dessert, but was apparently a crowd favorite. You savor another bite, teeth sinking into the warm, crunchy edge of a figgy. Fritter, syrup trickling down your fingers. The sweetness is intense, but without the artificial buzz of modern sugar. Roman desserts leaned into texture, crunch, chew, crumble, and often mix sweet with unexpected spices. Pepper in your pudding, bay leaves in your cookies, mint in your baked apples. It's a strange, oddly refined palate, and you begin to see why so many recipes read more like spells than instructions. You hear a soft conversation behind you, two older men reminiscing over the liber their mother used to make. Flat cakes with honey and cheese, offered to the household gods, and, occasionally, the neighborhood kids who hovered close enough to snag a piece. Religious offerings and dessert. Two flavors that mixed more often than you'd expect. Many Roman sweets doubled as sacred food. The libum, offered to Vesta, the goddess of the hearth. Honey cakes to Saturn during the Saturnalia. Even mola salsa, a salt and spelt mixture made by the Vestal virgins, was technically edible, though you probably wouldn't call it dessert unless your palate leaned toward punishment. You begin to nibble on a candied walnut, marveling at the stickiness of the syrup holding it all together. The recipe? Likely simple. Nuts, honey, maybe a pinch of black pepper, and patience. It hits you that Roman desserts weren't so much a culinary category as an indulgence window, open during celebrations, religious events, or the rare night when there was leftover grain and enough honey to spare. Mainstream history tells us these were luxury items. Honey wasn't cheap after all, and sugar wouldn't show up in Europe until much later. But not everything sweet was for the elite. Some treats, like fried pastries and dried fruit, could be made from what was already on hand in the average Roman kitchen. And when you're living in a city of over 1 million people, there's a demand for simple, portable joys. Historians still argue whether dessert was considered a standard part of daily Roman meals, or more of a festival indulgence. Some feasts absolutely ended with sweets, but many humble meals didn't. If you were lucky, you got a date, maybe a dried fig. If you were rich, you got a fig stuffed with pine nuts and dipped in honeyed wine. And if you were really rich, you hosted banquets where the final course wasn't just food, it was performance. Peacocks sculpted from sugar paste, table fountains that poured wine over spiced cakes, the kind of showy decadence that makes your current honey fritter look like a burnt toast crumb. You finish your treat and wipe your hands on your tunic, which is officially a lost cause. Around you, the crowd thins. A couple strolls away, laughing softly. The dessert cart boy dozes against a pillar, his tray empty, dreams lightly dripping, with syrup and applause. And just when you think your night is winding down, you hear the unmistakable call of a food peddler 2 streets over. The words are unfamiliar, sung in a half-melodic shout, but the meaning is universal. Come get your weird snacks before dawn, ruins everything. So off you go, drawn into the next phase of Roman dessert culture, the midnight bites, the fringe foods, the street corner surprises. You round the corner and find a man selling candied rose petals. You blink. That's not where you thought this was going. But he assures you they're delicious. Paper thin, crisped in syrup, and served curled like little floral scrolls. You try one. It tastes like perfume and honey had a very classy baby. And then there's the oddest treat yet, a cold pudding made with barley, honey, and snow, carried down from the Apennines. Yep, snow. It's grainy, oddly refreshing, and probably crawling with whatever microbes the mountain goats left behind. You love it. It's easy to forget sometimes, under all the marble and conquest, that Rome was also a place of play, and nowhere is that more evident than in its approach to dessert. Sweets weren't just for sustenance, they were for delight, for children at festivals, for workers after a long shift, for you, wandering the ancient streets with a sugar-glazed smile, and the faint feeling that maybe, just maybe, you're going to dream in honey tonight. The moon glows higher now, casting the city in silver and charcoal. You feel lighter, sweeter, more human. Full belly, sticky hands, and a mind swirling with dates and dough balls. You've dined like the average Roman tonight. Not the kind with columns and slaves and private gardens, but the one who scraped together enough sesterces for a hot meal and a sweet finish. And in the end, that's where real history lives. Not in scrolls and statues, but in the warm fried dough passed hand to hand in the dark. You drift from the candlelit desserts of the midnight cart into the softer shadows of a side alley, where the air is cooler, tinged now with the faint trace of wood smoke and something meatier. Rome never fully sleeps, and neither does its appetite. Somewhere nearby, you hear the dull clunk of a cleaver, the slap of something wet on stone, and a rhythmic chant. Perhaps someone trying to keep tempo while butchering a late-night pig's head. Because now, we're heading into meat territory. Specifically, what kinds of meat the average Roman could chew on without having to sell their grandmother. Now, when you think of Roman feasts, maybe you imagine a long table groaning under a roasted peacock stuffed with dormice, which are in turn stuffed with something else. That definitely happened. If you were rich, absurd, and had a lot to prove to your friends. But if you were a regular Roman citizen, your meat intake looked a lot humbler. Let's start with the basics. Pork. Pork was everywhere. Romans loved their pigs the way modern foodies love bacon memes, ham, sausages, salted pork belly. If it could be butchered, brined, or stuffed, they were on it. You pass a stall now, just barely open, where a man is hawking lengths of dried sausage from a dangling hook. The smell is sharp with garlic and fennel, and your stomach, already full of honey and fritters, dares you to consider another bite. You resist. Barely. Pork wasn't just tasty, it was practical. Pigs didn't need as much space as cattle, and they could eat pretty much anything, including scraps. Some Roman towns even had urban pig populations, a walking cleanup crew that doubled as future dinner. Smart, sustainable, and occasionally very loud. Next up, poultry. Chickens, geese, ducks. Birds were relatively accessible, especially for families who raised them in backyard pens. Eggs were a staple, of course, but when meat was needed, these birds filled the pot. Roast goose was actually a delicacy at festivals. Goose liver, yes, the Roman version of foie gras, was considered a fine thing, even if its production involved force feeding, a practice that remains controversial and highly gross even today. Historians still argue whether goose liver was a true delicacy for the masses, or strictly a luxury for the banquet class. Some surviving cookbooks suggest it trickled down further than we think. After all, the poor knew how to get creative with whatever parts weren't snatched up by the elite. You pause by a set of steps where a man is skewering what looks like grilled bird meat onto a spit. He grins and says one word, "Parser." You blink. That means sparrow. Yes, the Romans also ate tiny songbirds. Apparently, if it flies and fits in a pan, it's food. These sparrows were roasted whole, bones, beak, and all. Crunchy, chewy, and debatably worth the effort. The texture is a little like that one time you tried to eat a corn chip that had been dropped on gravel. More surprising still? Dormice. Yes, the famous Roman delicacy that historians mention with a mix of awe and disbelief. These were not street snacks, but status symbols. Chubby rodents fattened in clay jars called glyraria, then killed, stuffed with minced meat, herbs and nuts, and roasted or boiled. Rich Romans served them at parties to show off. Poorer Romans, probably just caught mice in their kitchens and tried not to scream. Fringe scholars speculate that rural families may have actually raised dormice themselves, not for status, but out of necessity. Meat was meat, after all. When you've got 6 mouths to feed and no access to pork, even a particularly plump rodent starts looking delicious in the right light. You continue walking. Somewhere to your left, a butcher's fire crackles. The scent of smoke-cured meat lingers in the air. Probably mutton, maybe goat. Sheep were common across the empire, especially in hillier regions. They gave wool, milk, and when things got desperate, dinner. Goat, on the other hand, was less glamorous, tougher, gamier, less beloved than pork, but widely eaten, especially in provincial towns or by poorer families. You might boil it with lentils, stew it with onions, or slather it in garum, and just hope your guests were polite. And then there's beef. Here's the twist. Beef wasn't that popular. Cows were more valuable alive, pulling carts, birthing calves, and giving milk. Most Romans didn't eat much beef unless the animal was old, injured, or part of a ritual slaughter. Even then, the meat might go to temples or be distributed as charity during festivals. It wasn't your typical Tuesday night protein. You pass, a large amphora lying on its side, probably once filled with salted meat, now dry and cracked. Rome, like many ancient cultures, preserved meat by salting or smoking. Not everyone had access to fresh cuts, so dried meat or sausage was essential for soldiers, travelers, and anyone living far from the central markets. Now let's not forget fish, especially the cheap stuff. You hear a splash nearby. A small basin of water holds live eels, squirming sluggishly in the moonlight. A fish vendor yawns and mutters something about anguilla, eel, popular in poorer areas. Slimy, protein-rich, and surprisingly popular with people who had more courage than taste buds. You'd roast it, stew it, or let it slowly dissolve into a garlicky mess that somehow qualified as comfort food. Small fish like sardines and anchovies were everyday staples too. They could be eaten fresh or dried, mashed into paste, or turned into, you guessed it, garum. Even shellfish made appearances. Oysters were harvested along the coast and sold by hawkers who, according to ancient graffiti, were not above lying about their freshness. By now, your feet are getting sore, and you plop down on a stone bench, staring up at a tangle of stars through the smoky Roman sky. You've passed more meat tonight than a supermarket deli, and you're starting to appreciate the complicated class dynamics hidden in every cut, skewer, and sausage. In theory, Rome was an empire of abundance. But in practice, food access was deeply unequal. A rich man could dine on roasted boar with wine-soaked figs. A poor man might boil sheep bones for broth and hope it didn't taste like yesterday's. Sandals. And in between was the great middle: artisans, soldiers, shopkeepers, people who stretched pork scraps into stew and prayed the butcher didn't give them the tail end of a goat. Still, Romans were resourceful. No meat went to waste. Tongues, ears, snouts, and feet into the pot. Liver, lungs, and other unmentionables. Minced, mixed with herbs, and served as a surprise. Even blood had its place in sausages and stews. You sigh, leaning back against the stone, your breath visible now in the cooling air. Somewhere, a dog barks. Somewhere else, a man is still chewing on eel. You've just had a crash course in Roman meat culture. Less gladiator banquets, more creative survival with animal bits no one names out loud. And as odd as it sounds, you feel a little closer to this ancient world now, bound together by the shared human truth that no matter the century, meat makes people weirdly proud and slightly squeamish. You rise slowly from the stone bench, limbs loose and thoughts sticky with the memory of roasted meat, stuffed dormice, and that one unsettling sparrow snack. As you shuffle forward, the street opens into a wider plaza, cobbled underfoot, quiet, and lined with shaded stalls that have long since closed. A few loiterers linger, hunched over amphorae, swapping slurred Latin that sounds more like lullabies than language. The scent here has shifted. It's no longer meat or honey, but something soft, earthy, and unmistakably baked. Bread. Rome runs on it. And now, so do you. You follow the aroma down a narrow side street, where heat radiates gently. From a large rounded structure, an open-air pastrinum or public bakery, the oven has long since cooled, its fire mere embers. But scattered around it are loaves, sacks of flour, and the ghostly outlines of a workday long finished. The bread you're picturing right now, soft, puffy, maybe with a golden crust that sings when tapped. Lower those expectations. Roman bread was more utilitarian. Think dense, heavy, and occasionally full of sand or pebbles, thanks to low-grade milling. Your teeth would need a vacation after a single bite. Still, to a Roman, bread wasn't a side dish. It was the center of everything. The most common variety was panis quadratus, those round, scored loaves that look like the love child of a discus, and a pie chart. Archaeologists found whole versions in Pompeii ovens, carbonized by volcanic fire, yet eerily intact, like the world's most depressing bake-off entry. You pick up a cooled loaf now, left behind by a generous baker or a forgetful apprentice. It's heavy in your hand, the crust firm, the scoring lines deep. You tear off a hunk and bite in. It's chewy, slightly sour, with a smoky undercurrent. There's wheat, definitely. Maybe a bit of spelt. Not bad, actually, if you ignore the occasional crunch that makes you worry you've chipped a molar. Here's the fun part. Not all Roman bread was equal. Rich folks had access to panis siligineus, made from fine white flour, fluffy, pale, and considered the best of the best. It was basically Roman brioche, minus the butter. For the rest of the population, especially laborers and slaves, there was panis plebeius, made from coarser grains like emmer or barley. It was darker, denser, and more filling, also more likely to contain things that shouldn't be in bread, like, say, dirt from the communal millstones, which were often shared and rarely cleaned. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of communal bakeries improved bread quality or just ensured everyone's loaves had the same ratio of flour to stray elbow grease. What's certain is that most Romans didn't bake at home. Fire was a hazard, and ovens were expensive. So they relied on these bakeries where you drop off your dough, marked with a stamped tag, and return later to pick up your cooked loaf, assuming no one stole it. You glance around the empty bakery and spot something else, a pile of libum. Cheese bread offered to the gods, or sometimes just your grumpy aunt. It's made from soft cheese, flour, and egg, shaped into a thick patty and baked until golden. More sacrament than snack, but edible either way. You try one. It's like biting into the past. Crumbly, tangy, strangely comforting. Bread wasn't just a meal in Rome, it was currency. The grain dole, or annona, provided subsidized or free grain to citizens, especially the poor. This wasn't charity, it was politics. Keeping the population fed meant keeping them loyal, or at least less likely to riot. You imagine lining up with your grain ration, hoping to trade it for a few loaves that wouldn't double as paving stones. And let's not forget flatbreads. Panis focaccius, the ancestor of modern focaccia, was baked on the hearth and brushed with oil, herbs, or whatever happened to be lying around. You pass a clay tray filled with one such bread now, blackened slightly at the edges, dotted with olives and what might be bits of onion. It smells divine, and you can't resist tearing off a corner. Salty, warm, perfectly imperfect. In taverns and army camps, bread doubled as a utensil. Stews were soaked up with it. Food was served on it. Sometimes it was the plate. And in the absence of plates, dignity, or a clean handkerchief. Bread was used to wipe greasy fingers and then eaten anyway. Sustainable, yes. Slightly gross, also yes. You duck beneath a wooden beam where a few loaves still hang from pegs, their round shapes tied with string. Portable, durable, and blessedly bland, perfect for travel. Roman soldiers, in fact, were issued hardtack-style biscuits that could double as armor in a pinch. Just add water, or wine, or tears. You pick one up. It's so hard it could be used to defend yourself in a tavern brawl. One fringe theory even suggests some lower-class Romans baked loaves with ground legumes or acorns when grain was scarce. These emergency breads were bitter and dense, but they got the job done. You imagine chewing through one while pretending it's cake, just to feel something. Bread wasn't all gloom and grind, though. During festivals, bakers got creative. Sweetened breads appeared, laced with dried fruit, honey, or poppy seeds. Some were braided or shaped into animals for children. Others were made into small buns, stuffed with nuts and cheese. You spot a child's handprint in the side of a flour, sack, preserved by time and carelessness, and wonder what sweetbread they were hoping to sneak. Of course, Roman graffiti also records complaints about bread. "The baker at the corner cheats the scales," one message warns. Another scrawl brags, "Best bread in town, don't go to Marcius's shop, he burns everything." So, not much has changed. Bread in Rome was a symbol of stability, of survival, and occasionally of mild existential despair. It filled bellies, marked status, and carried the weight of empire, both literally and metaphorically. Without it, the city would have collapsed faster than a souffle in a wind tunnel. You sit again, this time beside a basket of cooled loaves, and break off one final piece. It's dark bread, maybe barley, maybe spelt. Your jaw works slowly, methodically, and you let the flavor settle. Earthy, plain, almost meditative. Rome has fed you a lot tonight, but this simple crust feels the most intimate, as if 1,000 hands, across centuries, reached out and said, "Here, this is how we survived." You chew, you swallow, you smile. The crust lingers on your tongue, coarse and resolute, as you rise again, easing your way out of the bakery's lingering warmth and back into the Roman night. Your path veers toward the darkened edge of the market district, past a cluster of amphorae and half-toppled crates. You're not done eating yet. Not quite. Because now we're diving into what the Romans slurped, sipped, or guzzled down. Welcome to the weird, wonderful world of ancient Roman drinks. You shuffle past a vine-draped stall, long closed for the night, though the air still clings to a faint tang of something sour and spicy. Wine, obviously. We have to start with wine. If bread was Rome's food foundation, wine was its lifeblood. It wasn't just a dinner companion. It was breakfast, lunch, and moral lubricant. But don't picture stemmed glasses or romantic vineyard tastings. Roman wine came in clay amphorae, often sealed with pitch or resin, and it needed help. Usually. A lot of help before anyone sane could enjoy it. You see, Roman wine was strong, and not fun night out strong. More like accidental mouthwash strong. That's why they always diluted it with water. Hot water, cold water, seawater, yes, really. Or even snow, if you were fancy. Drinking undiluted wine, mirum, was considered barbaric. If you did it in public, people might question whether you were Roman at all, or just a visiting barbarian with poor manners and a death wish. Right now, you pause near a tavern door, cracked open and softly echoing with late-night laughter. Inside, a few drinkers huddle around a shared jug, dipping ladles into a mixture that smells of herbs, smoke, and something fruity. That's mulsum, a blend of wine and honey, served warm and thick. Not quite cocktail hour, but close. Romans loved to doctor their wine. Honey was a common addition, as were herbs like thyme, rosemary, or even wormwood. Spiced wine, sour wine, infused wine. They had more variations than a modern hipster bar menu. You might even come across conditum paradoxum, a recipe involving pepper, saffron, dates, and bay leaves. One gulp, and you'd be wondering if your taste buds were broken, or just overwhelmed. Historians still argue whether these heavily spiced wines were actually beloved, or just desperate attempts to cover the taste of bad vintages. Considering how often wine was transported long distances in boiling heat, the answer might be both. You wander farther now, past a broken wine cart, leaking its sticky cargo onto the stones. The scent is sweet and sour all at once, like spoiled grapes hiding under cinnamon. You wince and keep walking. But wine wasn't just for relaxation. It was part of ritual, business, and everyday life. Soldiers drank it, slaves drank it, even children had a splash now and then, diluted into oblivion. It was safer than water, frankly, which often came flavored with algae, mystery microbes, or bits of unfortunate frogs. Of course, not everyone could afford wine. The lower classes might drink posca, a mix of vinegar, water, and herbs. You pause now at a wooden bowl set out for passers-by, the liquid within cloudy and sharp-smelling. Take a sip. Go on, be brave. It tastes like a salad dressing made by someone who hates you, but it was cheap, hydrating, and oddly refreshing on a hot day. Roman soldiers reportedly loved it. One fringe theory suggests it helped stave off scurvy or stomach bugs, though others think it was just a grim compromise between price and palate. Then there was acetum, essentially sour wine that hadn't turned completely to vinegar. The kind of thing you drank while telling yourself, it's still good, right? Often it wasn't. Now, if you were really strapped, you might make your own pseudo-wine at home, fermenting grape skins, leftover pulp, or even raisins in water. The result? A weak, cloudy concoction that probably tasted like regret and raisins, but it had alcohol, and sometimes that was enough. You pass another stall now, where a young woman ladles a hot drink from a bubbling pot. The smell hits you. Honey, wine, and spices again. Another batch of mulsum or maybe cervisia, Roman beer. Yes, they had beer too, though they didn't like to talk about it. Beer was a barbarian's drink, according to upper-class Romans. The elite sniffed at it, calling it crude and uncivilized. But out on the empire's fringes, especially in Gaul and Egypt, beer was common. Made from fermented grain, often cloudy, and low in alcohol, it was hearty and filling. You imagine Roman traders holding their noses while drinking it, then secretly admitting it wasn't half bad. Romans also drank milk, cow, goat, or sheep, but rarely by itself. It spoiled fast, and was often turned into cheese, yogurt, or added to cooking. There are mentions of curdled milk used medicinally, or mixed into desserts, but drinking a glass of cold milk just wasn't the vibe. Fruit juices existed too, though usually in the form of grape must. Freshly crushed juice boiled down into syrup. This defrutum or sapper was used more like a sweetener than a drink. It might sneak into your wine or drizzle onto your porridge, but no one sipped it on a veranda while watching the sunset. You slow as you pass a cistern, its surface catching torchlight. Romans were master engineers, and their aqueducts brought water into cities with astonishing efficiency. But cleanliness? Let's say it varied. Street fountains served the masses, but the water might mingle with runoff, animal waste, or whatever your neighbor dumped down the alley that morning. So wine, and its diluted cousins, remained the safer choice. Some wild fringe ideas suggest that elite Romans sometimes drank snow-chilled beverages in summer, imported from mountain peaks. Others claim flavored water, infused with flowers or herbs, appeared at posh banquets, maybe even proto-lemonade. Historians can't agree whether these were rare luxuries or fanciful exaggerations from old scrolls, written by men who clearly missed their snacks. You stop again, letting your body sway gently in place, lulled by the distant splash of water and the warmth that still radiates from your last sip of imaginary mulsum. It's easy to see how important drink was to Roman life, not just for hydration, but for ritual, comfort, and identity. Because in Rome, what you drank and how you drank it said everything about who you were. You raise your invisible cup now to the night air and toast the empire in silence, to the wine, to the vinegar, to the beverage brave enough to include pepper and dates in the same sentence. The cobblestones beneath your feet are slick with evening dew now, softened by centuries of wear, and a bit of that spilled vinegar wine from earlier. You step around it, passing a shuttered butcher's stall where stray dogs curl up like knotted ropes, but your nose twitches. There's something more here, a scent both comforting and slightly weird. It's sweet and smoky and faintly reminiscent of breakfast cereal, if breakfast cereal had trust issues. Yes, it's time to talk dessert. Ancient Rome didn't exactly have patisseries on every corner, but that doesn't mean the Romans skipped out on sweet endings. Their version of dessert was a little rough around the edges, less creme brulee and more, let's see what sticks to this honey. Your first stop is a modest thermopolium, a kind of Roman snack bar. It's shuttered now, but you peer through the slats. There, in the shadows, you catch sight of a tray lined with globuli, little cheese fritters, fried and then drenched in honey. They're like the love child of mozzarella sticks and donut holes. You imagine the crispy edges giving way to warm, creamy centers, soaked in syrupy sweetness. You pinch one off the tray. It's cooled, but still a bit sticky. You bite. There's that sharp tang of sheep's cheese, mellowed by the honey with a faint crunch of semolina. Strange and satisfying. Definitely something you'd eat 3 of before wondering if you've made a mistake. This was how Romans sweetened their lives. With honey, the golden glue of the empire. Sugar, remember, wasn't in their pantry. Honey was everything. It sweetened drinks, coated meat, glazed fruit, and stuck together just about any baked good ambitious enough to call itself dessert. Another favorite, dulcia domestica, stuffed dates. Imagine plump dates, pitted and crammed, with ground nuts, maybe a hint of pepper, then rolled in honey and roasted. You come across a few scattered on a stone plate, abandoned like forgotten jewels. You pop one into your mouth. It's chewy, sticky, a little spicy, a little nutty, like a Mediterranean Snickers bar from 2 years ago. Historians still argue whether desserts were a daily treat for commoners or mainly saved for festival days and elite feasts. The answer, like most things in Rome, depends on your status. But even modest homes had access to basic sweets, fruit, nuts, and those ever-present pots of honey. You wander past a cart filled with baskets of dried figs and raisins. Not glamorous, but functional. Romans snacked on dried fruit often, especially figs. They were cheap, portable, and available long after the fresh ones had disappeared from the markets. Plus, you could press them into little fig cakes, figline, which made for a surprisingly satisfying chew, even if they looked a bit like edible fossils. Over in the distance, a man douses a tray of something with what smells like sesame oil. That's another ancient favorite. Sesame honey candy, kind of like a proto-granola bar. You could mix in nuts or poppy seeds, roll it out, let it harden, and break it into shards. Sweet, oily, and a solid jaw workout. You pass a communal oven now, still warm from earlier, and spot a pan resting on its edge. Inside is a flattened cake-like thing, golden brown and flecked with herbs. This could be libum again, or maybe even sevillum, a kind of honey cheesecake made with ricotta-like cheese, egg, and flour. Once baked, it was served warm with honey poured on top, often flavored with bay leaves. You pick at a corner. It's crumbly, soft and fragrant. An ancient cousin of the modern cheesecake, minus the crust and dignity. Still, not bad. Some fringe Roman desserts blurred the line between course and experiment. There's evidence of apples boiled in wine, pears, poached in honey with cumin, or even jellied milk, sort of like flan's awkward ancestor. The textures would have surprised modern palates. Creaminess wasn't the goal, richness and aroma were. And yes, the Romans had ice. Well, sort of. You step into the edge of a shadowy atrium now, where someone set out a mixing bowl filled with a slushy mixture. In the wealthier circles, it wasn't unheard of for slaves to fetch snow from the mountains, which was then mixed with fruit syrups or honeyed wine to make a kind of primitive sorbet. It was an extravagant treat, usually reserved for elite, feasts or displays of wealth that bordered on theatrical. Of course, it didn't store well. Your ice cream had about 5 minutes before it became a very expensive puddle. And what about candy? Well, not in the modern sense, but candied fruit was a thing. Grapes or melon pieces dried and dipped in honey. Think ancient fruit snacks without the foil wrapper or brand loyalty. Kids might have chewed on these during festivals, along with sweetened nuts or roasted chickpeas rolled in syrup. You pause now beside a child's toy, an old wooden spinning top discarded near a bench, and wonder if they ever swapped treats like modern kids do. Probably. Kids are kids, no matter the century. And then there's must cakes, made with grape, must. The thick, sweet syrup left over from pressing wine grapes. Mix that with flour, anise, and a bit of lard. Bake it, and you've got yourself a chewy, fragrant dessert that tastes like fall and regret. You try a bite from a cracked cake left on a dish. It's oddly earthy, and the anise hits like a licorice punch to the face. Not for everyone, but definitely memorable. There's one more treat worth mentioning. Pulse punica. A kind of sweet porridge made from semolina, milk, honey, and eggs. Almost like rice pudding, minus the rice. Rich and sticky, it was probably eaten warm, served in ceramic bowls that retained the heat. Perfect for late evenings like this one, where the city hums quietly under moonlight, and even the stray dogs have gone to bed. You breathe in the lingering scent of honey and herbs, of wine and ash, and let it all settle deep in your chest. Roman desserts might not win awards for sophistication, but they did their job. They comforted, they filled, they lingered, and as you lick a bit of honey from your finger and turn toward the next shadowed lane, you realize they still do. You trail a sticky fingerprint along the stone wall as you wander past the last of the dessert carts, the sweet taste of honey still clinging to your breath like a memory. The streets are quieter now. Lanterns burn low, and the air settles, cooler and thicker. You follow your nose this time, not to a bakery, not to a bar, but toward a darker corner of the city where spices, oils, and vinegars once mingled in, jars and amphorae, and household cooks muttered over fire pits about dinner disasters and triumphs alike. Tonight, you're stepping into the Roman kitchen. Not the grand banquet halls of emperors, but the cramped, smoky, awkward little spaces where the food actually happened. Roman kitchens, or culinary, were often tucked into the back corners of homes, small, windowless, and pretty much a health inspector's recurring nightmare. You enter one now, stooping beneath a blackened lintel and immediately feeling the warmth of lingering embers in a small brick hearth. There's no chimney, just a vent in the ceiling that half works. Smoke curls around your ankles and you're already squinting, wondering how Roman cooks didn't all walk around looking like campfire survivors. The secret? They didn't stay in there long if they could help it. Now, if you were wealthy, things got a bit fancier. Larger homes might have dedicated cooking staff, slaves who specialized in everything from butchering to sauce prep to pastry. But even then, the tools weren't what you might expect. No ovens in the modern sense, just open hearths, portable braziers, and a lot of guesswork. You glance down at the hearth, a shallow clay pot simmers slowly, and a bundle of leeks and herbs rests beside it. This could be pulse, a thick porridge that served as the Roman culinary canvas. Made from grains like emmer wheat or barley, this was the go-to for everyday meals, dressed up or down depending on your budget and ambitions. Sometimes, that meant a simple dash of salt or olive oil. Other times, the pottage became a full-on stew, packed with lentils, onions, garum, and chunks of fish or meat if the pantry was feeling generous. You give it a stir with a wooden ladle and sniff. It's earthy, rich, with an afterkick of anchovy funk from the garum. Delicious. Maybe. Nourishing. Definitely. And now comes the fun part. Roman flavoring. You turn toward the spice shelf, or, rather, a series of ceramic jars labelled in smudged Latin. There's silphium, or maybe laser, a pungent, now extinct seasoning that Romans loved so much they literally consumed it to oblivion. Historians still argue whether silphium was a wild fennel variant or some now lost plant from North Africa with aphrodisiac qualities. Either way, it made everything taste just a little more Roman. There's black pepper too, imported from India and outrageously expensive. A sprinkle could show off your wealth without saying a word. A surprising favourite? Cumin, used in both savoury and sweet dishes. And mint. Yes, mint, which made its way into meats, sauces, and even those sticky stuffed dates you sampled earlier. Next to the spices sits a series of flasks. One contains vinegar, sharp, aged, perfect for balancing out all that rich, oily food. Another is filled with olive oil, the true liquid gold of the Roman pantry. Cold-pressed, green, grassy, and used with abandon. You drizzle a little onto a slab of flatbread to soak it up. Still soft, still warm, still perfect. Cooking wasn't just about ingredients, it was about time. Roman recipes, like those from the Apicius cookbook, one of the oldest known, read like riddles. Measurements, vague. Temperatures, non-existent. Instructions, more like suggestions. You were expected to know what a dish should feel like. Smell, sound like bubbling in its pot. Trial and error wasn't a nuisance, it was the whole method. You hear footsteps now, the imagined shuffle of a tired cook returning for one last check on tomorrow's prep. They glance over your shoulder, nod approvingly, and pull out a jar filled with something dark and chunky. Ah, yes. Time to talk. Sauces. Romans were obsessed with them. The most famous, of course, is garum, fermented fish sauce. If you've forgotten, don't worry. The smell just jogged your memory. It's made by layering fish guts with salt, leaving it in the sun for months, then straining off the liquid. It was the ketchup, soy sauce, and Worcestershire all rolled into one. Every home had some, rich or poor. And yes, there were upscale artisanal garums too. Because even in Rome, someone always had a fancier condiment. Other sauces mixed garum with honey, vinegar, pepper, and herbs. The result? Salty sweet, oddly tangy, and surprisingly addictive. You dip a crust of bread into one now and taste umami centuries ahead of its time. Cooking fuel was mostly wood or charcoal, though coal was used in some parts of the empire. You spot a pile stacked neatly in the corner, along with kindling and a little basket of pine cones, natural fire starters. Efficient, sooty, but space was always limited. That's why many Romans relied on popinae, little food joints selling ready-made meals. Not everyone had a kitchen. In fact, apartment dwellers, which was most people, often weren't allowed to cook indoors due to fire risk. So they grabbed lunch on the go, maybe a hot stew ladled into a clay bowl, or some seasoned beans wrapped in flatbread. You pass a table now with some ancient tools laid out, a mortar and pestle stained with herbs, a bronze grater still dusted with aged cheese, and a series of long, two-pronged forks made of iron. There's a ladle with a cracked wooden handle and something resembling a pasta roller, but for flatbreads or dough strips. Oh, and yes, Romans had pasta, sort of. Not spaghetti, but sheets and strips of wheat dough boiled or baked. Lagane, flat, unleavened layers, might be the ancestor of modern lasagna, though without tomatoes or cheese, it was less comfort food and more interesting chew. Cheese did exist, of course, lots of it, mostly from goat or sheep, milk, soft cheeses, hard cheeses, smoked cheeses, used in sauces, baked into bread, or just served in crumbling wedges at the end of a meal. And eggs. Always eggs. Scrambled, baked, boiled, even mixed with wine and honey to make strange little custards or fluffy omelettes served with fish sauce. You're not sure whether to be intrigued or mildly alarmed. By now, the hearth has gone from warm to barely glowing. The clay pots have stopped bubbling, the jars are sealed, the tools cleaned and stacked. You step out into the night again, the smell of smoke clinging to your hair and clothes. Roman kitchens weren't polished. They weren't clean by today's standards, but they were alive, filled with hiss, sizzle, spice, and improvisation. And from these dark corners came the food that kept the empire running. You walk away slowly, the last hint of garum still haunting your tongue, and promise yourself that, next time, you'll stick to dessert. You move now through a quieter street, flanked by stucco walls scorched with the faded graffiti of decades past. Some political, some poetic, some just surprisingly detailed stick figures, with suspiciously large noses. The lantern light dances across cracked mosaics, casting elongated shadows. Up ahead, a new aroma beckons: grilled meat, char, salt, fat. It's primal and inviting. You're headed for a street-side popina. Popinae were the Roman world's version of greasy spoon diners. Minus the spoons, sometimes minus the hygiene. Places where the working class, day labourers, slaves on errands, or anyone tired of boiling porridge could grab a quick bite. You step into one now, ducking under a canvas, awning faded by sun and soot. There's a long stone counter, embedded with sunken jars called dolia. Inside them, remnants of the day's offerings cling to the sides. Lentils, cooked snails, wine, stewed chickpeas, and something that may once have been a cabbage. You lean against the warm stone. The thermopolium keeper, a portly man with impressive nose hair and a disinterested air, wipes his hands on a wine-stained cloth. He nods toward the grill. Here's where things get interesting, because Rome loved meat, but it didn't exactly roll out steaks and burgers. What you got, instead, was a mosaic of cuts, some tender, many tough, often salted, sometimes smoked, and always seasoned with confidence. There's a spit turning slowly over embers, spearing something vaguely avian, probably a pigeon, or maybe a dormouse. Yes, glyers, the famed Roman delicacy, fattened in special jars called gleraria, stuffed with minced meat and herbs, then roasted or boiled. You squint. Could be. You're not sure whether to be excited or disturbed. Next to it sizzles a slab of salted pork belly. This is closer to comfort territory. Romans were big fans of pork. Porcellum lactantem, or suckling pig, was a centerpiece dish at banquets. Common folk, meanwhile, enjoyed petasso, cured ham boiled with figs and laurel leaves. Rich, slightly sweet, aromatic, like a ham roast wrapped in a poem. You reach for a slice offered by the cook. It's salty, chewy, smoky, somehow both familiar and foreign. You chew slowly, letting it settle. Historians still argue whether the average Roman consumed more fish or meat. The answer, likely, varied by region and season. In coastal areas, fish dominated. Inland, you might find more pork and poultry, chicken, duck, goose, though beef was less common and often reserved for sacrifices. And yes, you did hear goose. In fact, goose was one of the most esteemed birds in the Roman world. Pliny the Elder wrote about them with genuine admiration, which is saying something from a guy who also had passionate thoughts about beets. You sit now on a low wooden bench near a group of labourers huddled around a shared dish of offal stew. This is minutal, a dish of chopped meats, tongue, heart, liver, cooked in wine, garum, herbs, and honey. You're offered a bite on a broken clay shard. No forks here, remember. Just fingers and occasional spoons for soup. You try it. It's rich, gamey, faintly sweet, Challenging, comforting, confusing. Meat wasn't cheap. So much of what people ate was meant to stretch a small amount. Think meatballs, yes, Romans had those, or layered pies stuffed with minced liver and grain. You walk past a tray holding Essitia aumentata, which might be the ancestor of the modern hamburger. Ground meat mixed with pepper, wine-soaked bread, pine nuts, and garum, then fried. It's dense, savoury, and frankly, you'd eat this at AM without complaint. And sausage? Oh yes. The Romans adored their sausages. You pass a smoky corner where links of Lucanici hang drying. These spicy, garlicky pork sausages were named after the region of Lucania and carried a reputation as travellers' fare. They were often grilled or fried and stuffed with herbs, pine nuts, and sometimes, well, whatever needed using up. There's even evidence of blood sausage, botulus, which was an acquired taste. You find one now, cut in slices on a chipped plate. You stare. It stares back. You pass. The fun, or unsettling, part of Roman meat consumption was their total commitment. Nose to tail wasn't a trend, it was the norm. Brains, lungs, udders, and trotters all featured in recipes. Even peacock tongue showed up at the fancier tables, presumably for show more than taste. You peer into a pot simmering over a low flame. It's bubbling, aromatic, and contains something pinkish with a lot of bones. You ask. The cook grins. Flamingo stew. And you thought your leftovers were exotic. Now, one fringe food trend among Romans. Testiculi taurini, or, you guessed it, bull testicles, served boiled, sliced, and dressed in vinegar and herbs. Medicinal? Maybe. Macho posturing? Probably. Tasty? Historians are oddly silent. Despite all this meat, Romans didn't refrigerate. Instead, they preserved. Salting, smoking, drying. These were everyday techniques. You pass a storeroom filled with hanging slabs of perna, or dry-cured ham, and bundles of sausages dusted with ash to ward off flies. The air is thick, spicy, and just a bit alarming. There's one more thing to notice before you leave the Papina. It's not food. It's a dice game happening near the back wall. 3 men crowd around a rough wooden board, tossing knucklebones, arguing over bets. This was how meals often ended, with gambling, maybe a brawl, and a lot of shouting about whose turn it was to pay for the spiced kidneys. You rise from your bench, stomach buzzing with a mix of curiosity and possibly undercooked goose, and step out into the night. Roman meat culture wasn't about perfection. It was about resourcefulness, flair, and flavor layered upon flavor. They took every part of the animal and made it speak, sometimes whispering decadence, other times shouting, "We had nothing else." You pat your belly, vaguely aware of the smoky tang still clinging to your teeth, and you walk on, toward quieter streets, and maybe something less likely to look back at you next time. The warmth of roasted meats lingers behind you like an aftertaste you can't quite identify. Part delicious, part suspicious. You head uphill now, weaving through narrow alleys where laundry flaps overhead, and stray cats linger around doorsteps, always waiting for scraps. The air shifts again, thinner and cooler. You've climbed your way to where the wealthier citizens of Rome reside. Tonight, you're getting past the gates. Behind the high walls and carefully tended vines, you find a domus, a private Roman home of the upper class. Not the emperor's palace, not yet. This is aristocratic comfort, mid-tier opulence. You slip through the atrium, where a marble basin catches rainwater and echoes the faint chirp of nesting birds. Somewhere, water trickles from a small fountain. Everything smells faintly of beeswax and crushed herbs. The kitchen here isn't the smoky corner of a cramped insular apartment. It's still no 5-star chef's dream, more like a heat box, with better airflow, but it's staffed and stocked. A bustling team prepares dishes not for a rowdy street crowd, but for tonight's dinner party. This is where Roman cuisine, at its most ambitious and ridiculous, begins to show off. And so, do you. You wander toward the triclinium, the formal dining room. It's lavish, dimly lit by bronze lamps and flickering torches. Low couches line the walls, designed not for sitting, but reclining. You pick your spot and drape yourself sideways like a lizard who's won the lottery. A servant appears and offers a cloth for your hands. Another adjusts your cushion, a little, too politely. This is how upper-class Romans dined, reclining on their left elbows, nibbling and sipping for hours, while music played softly in the background and poets tried way too hard. The first course arrives, gustatio, the appetizer round. It's delicate, deliberately small, and meant to awaken your palate. There are olives, pickled vegetables, a few salted almonds. A dish of cold cucumber salad dressed with vinegar and mint lands near you. Light, crunchy, refreshing. And then come the eggs. Romans were egg people. They loved them in every form, soft-boiled, pickled, baked into custards. There's a common Latin phrase, ab ovo usque ad mala, from the egg to the apples, meaning from beginning to end. Dinner always began with the egg. Tonight, you're served deviled-style boiled eggs drizzled with liquamen, sprinkled with pepper, and garnished with a suspiciously vibrant green herb. The yolk is creamy. The whole thing tastes slightly fishy and slightly brilliant. Next to arrive, stuffed mushrooms. Yes, they did that too. Filled with a paste of breadcrumbs, herbs, and minced anchovies. They melt in your mouth, and just as you start wondering if this could be your favorite dish so far, someone sets down a plate of maritum. Ah yes, maritum. A herbed cheese spread pounded in a mortar with garlic, vinegar, salt, olive oil, and often a good amount of bruised parsley. Served with rustic bread, it's a flavor punch to the tongue. One bite and you're wide awake again, maybe too awake. You down a gulp of mulsum, the sweet spiced wine that flows freely at meals like this. And the wine, never served neat. That would be barbaric. Romans diluted it with water and infused it with honey, saffron, even seawater. Hot or cold, depending on the season. What you sip now is light, floral, faintly medicinal, and definitely stronger than it tastes. Then the door creaks open. The main course parade begins. There's roasted duck with dates, a whole sea base stuffed with herbs and pine nuts, pork, glazed with honey and mustard seeds. Everything arrives in pieces, not all at once. Dishes placed, removed, replaced, often just for show. Some of them are decoys, peacocks with painted feathers hiding chicken meat beneath, or loaves of bread that break open to reveal steaming little meat pies inside. One particularly dramatic offering, a boar's head, its tusks polished, mouth open as if mid-snarl. It's surrounded by sausages, olives, and a scattering of fig leaves. Very theatrical. You take a sausage. Nobody stops you. The flavors are bold, layered, occasionally jarring. Sweet meats, salty sauces, spicy wine. Romans had no chill about subtlety. You bite into a honey-glazed chicken wing dusted with crushed coriander and black pepper. It's oddly delicious, but your brain is confused. Dinner isn't supposed to taste like dessert. Still, they loved this chaos. Culinary contradiction was fashionable. Sweet and sour, soft and crunchy. A dish with hot nuts and cold sauce, why not? You catch a whiff of cinnamon on roasted hare and decide, sure, that makes sense now. There's a dish passed around, a small, flaky pastry filled with something creamy. Cheese, honey, a little of both. Historians still argue whether Roman desserts were really desserts or just overly sweet entrees. You eat it anyway. And now, the guest of honor stands to deliver a toast. The room quiets. He lifts his cup and launches into a rambling story about a seagull, an amphora, and a runaway slave with excellent dance moves. The details are fuzzy, the punchline unclear, but everyone laughs. You sip your wine, smile politely, and glance at the dessert platter sliding your way. Dessert isn't massive in Roman dining, but it exists. Apples, pears, melons, dates stuffed with nuts and dipped in honey. Cakes made from semolina and cheese, soaked in syrup. You take a little of everything. Moderation, after all, is for Stoics. One of the quirkier items, a candy made from fried chickpeas glazed in honey, hardened into clusters like proto-granola, sweet, nutty, stubbornly crunchy. Another, baked pears poached in wine and sprinkled with crushed fennel seeds. They shimmer on the plate like jewels, but taste like warm spiced cider. In the corner, a musician plays something soft on a lyre. Someone else begins reciting Virgil, but quickly pivots to a bawdy love poem, probably a party classic. The laughter bubbles again, and you realize hours have passed. Dinner is winding down. Servants pass out hot towels. The lamps burn lower. Someone's dozing against a cushion. Someone else is arguing, gently, about whether goats or sheep produce better cheese. You linger, reclining, belly full, mind foggy. Roman dinner parties weren't just about food. They were performances, statements, slow-dripping spectacles where conversation, music, and status dance together on plates. And while you may never serve peacock with mustard glaze, tonight you dined like a citizen who mattered. A citizen with access to saffron, honey, and a comfortable couch. Your fingers still smell of pine nuts as you slip out into the cooling night, another torchlit alley leading you forward. You walk with the soft lull of full-belly sleepiness weighing down. Your limbs, a drowsy sort of buzz, humming behind your eyes. The domus grows smaller behind you, swallowed by shadow and distance, while ahead, the smell changes yet again. Not sweet, not savory. This one's sharp, tangy, almost oceanic. You're nearing the part of Rome that wakes up early and smells like low tide. The fishmongers are here. Before dawn, this district comes alive. But you're lucky tonight. Through the haze of memory or magic or something in your mulsum, you catch it just as it's starting to stir. Baskets are being unloaded from creaky carts, sloshing slightly as they're hoisted onto stone counters still cool from the night air. You drift toward the source. A stall has its torches lit already. Waxed cloth covers half its wares, but the other half is bold and unapologetically pungent. Fish of every shape and sliminess gleam under lamplight. Trout, tuna, sardines, and a few squishy mysteries that may or may not still be alive. This is where Roman food began for many. The sea wasn't just a backdrop to conquest, it was a pantry. Salt water was opportunity, and fish were central to both nutrition and economy. You crouch near a wooden bucket filled with shimmering, freshly caught anchovies. These aren't for eating straight, they're bound for something more potent. Your nose twitches. Ah, yes. Garum. You can't visit Rome, ancient or otherwise, without meeting its most controversial condiment. Garum was everywhere. It was ketchup, soy sauce, Worcestershire, and anchovy paste, rolled into one salty, fermented liquid, made by layering fish guts, salt, and herbs in vats, leaving them out in the sun and waiting. For weeks, sometimes months. The result? A golden brown sauce. Romans poured on everything, everything. You pass a workshop, low stone walls, heavy, jars with crusted rims, and a scent that hits your sinuses with the precision of a thrown javelin. Welcome to the garum factory. Industrial zones like this dotted the coasts of the empire, especially in Hispania and North Africa. The highest quality stuff, garum sociorum, was prized like caviar. It was the kind of thing you gifted a senator or used sparingly at an elite dinner. But they also had alec, the chunky byproduct sludge fed to the poor, or, if we're honest, probably mixed into street food so you wouldn't notice. You glance around. A boy pours liquid from one amphora into another, careful not to spill. A drop. That stuff is valuable. A cook might trade a cup of it for a full meal's worth of vegetables. Still, not all fish stayed in jars. Some were delicately grilled, especially mullet, which Romans loved for its color-changing skin. Supposedly, if served alive, yes, alive, the skin shimmered red to purple before death. This thrilled Roman diners. You stare blankly at a netted tank. No shimmering tonight, thank the gods. Another stall lays out salted mackerel and dried eel. Preservation mattered when ice was rare and refrigerators didn't exist. Smoking, salting, or brining meant your fish could travel from Sicily to Gaul without becoming a biohazard. You sample a piece of taricose, a preserved fish steak slathered in olive oil and garlic. It's dense, salty, and oddly satisfying. And no, it's not just your imagination. A Roman sailor once used a fish steak as a weapon in a tavern brawl. Efficient and delicious. Historians still argue whether fish consumption was more prevalent than red meat, especially among lower income citizens. The evidence is scattered like broken amphorae, but it's clear. Fish was available, adaptable, and often cheaper, especially if you were content with sardines or whatever the garum factory left behind. You wander past a marble-topped counter where a street vendor is slicing up what looks like fish sausage. It's greyish. You're skeptical. He hands you a sample anyway. You bite down. Surprisingly good. Peppery, with a briny bite and a smoky aftertaste. You'd pay 3 denarii for this after a long day of hauling bricks. Next comes a stewed dish, probably piscis elixis, fish boiled with leeks, lentils, coriander, and, you guessed it, garum. A woman ladles you a portion into a clay bowl. It's brothy, herbal, and filled with soft, flaky white chunks. Somewhere between soup and second breakfast. In elite circles, of course, fish got the full red carpet treatment. Lucius Licinius, Lucullus, the original show-off, once dug artificial pools just to farm specific breeds of sea bream. Because nothing says power like fish with their own spar. You walk past a scribbled wall note. Hic venditur muria bona. Good fish sauce, sold here. It's graffiti, sure, but it's also advertising. Branding was real even in the 1st century. The next vendor sells shellfish. You pause at a platter of oysters. Fresh from the coast of Campania, probably. Romans ate them raw, with vinegar and pepper. You try one, surprised at its sweetness. Not bad. No hot sauce, no lemon. But the sea does its job. Next to it, a basket of sea urchins. Yes, the spiky ones. Cracked open and eaten raw, like a weird underwater pudding. You're offered one. You decline. Some adventures are better left in marble reliefs. Quirkier still, there's record of Romans eating moray eel. Not just eating, but training them. One noble, Vedius Pollio, kept a pool of them. Not for food, for punishment. He supposedly fed misbehaving slaves to them. Disturbing, yes, and probably exaggerated, but still, that's one party trick you don't want to recreate. You continue your stroll past stacked amphorae, many stained from years of holding fish sauce. Their interiors were sometimes lined with resin to prevent leakage, because nothing ruins your sea voyage like anchovy juice seeping through the hull. Even as the market starts bustling around you, more shouts, more haggling, more clatter, you remain in your own little bubble, floating, observing. Here, fish wasn't just food, it was an industry, a culture, a deeply personal relationship between Rome and the sea. You sip from a cup of diluted wine a merchant offers you and lean against a wall warmed by early light. The fish stalls stretch out around you like tentacles from a net, and you wonder for a moment how much of Rome's empire was held together with garum and good fishing weather. You stretch your limbs, the scent of brine in your nose and salt, drying on your lips, and prepare to slip back into the city's denser alleys. But don't worry, you haven't had the weirdest Roman delicacy yet. That's coming. You leave the salty chaos of the fish market behind, your tunic sleeves still faintly perfumed with the smell of brine and garlic. Your stomach is comfortably full, your limbs loose with wine and wandering. Rome isn't slowing down, though. It's like a beast with 100 bellies, and you're about to see how the empire fed its more adventurous appetites. You step into a shaded courtyard tucked behind a row of bakeries. There's a man with a portable grill, fanning coals and flipping something skewered. The smell hits you before the shape registers. Charcoal, meat, and a mysterious undertone that might be cinnamon? Or maybe regret. He offers you a bite. You hesitate. He shrugs, says it's cervella frita, fried brains, from a young calf, cooked with crushed pepper, lovage, and a little honey. Because apparently, even brains deserved seasoning. You try it. It's soft, not unpleasant, kind of creamy, kind of confusing. You chew carefully, eyes narrowed, reconsidering. Several life choices. This was normal. Romans didn't have our modern squeamishness. If it was inside an animal and not actively trying to escape, someone found a recipe for it. Tongues, kidneys, livers, intestines, offal as we now call it, were common food, especially in the middle and lower economic classes. Resourcefulness, they'd say. Nose-to-tail dining. One popular dish you stumble into next. Garum-soaked, pork lungs, stewed with lentils. Hearty, earthy, definitely rich in something. Maybe iron, maybe regret again. You spot a cluster of diners sharing andouillette-like sausage made with, you guessed it, intestines. They don't flinch. They talk about chariot races while chewing. You're offered a slice. You take it. It's chewy. A little gamey. Honestly, kind of works. A splash of vinegar helps. Nearby, a food stand has signs for testiculi tororum, bull, testicles, breaded and deep fried. Served with a mustardy dipping sauce, Romans considered them nutritious, possibly an early attempt at energy food. You pass on this one. We all have limits. Now, about that weirdest delicacy we promised. You head toward the edge of the Sabura district, where experimental cooks thrived. And that's where you find the dormice. Tiny, adorable, twitchy rodents that would, in any other context, be someone's pet or pest control. Romans, they saw hors d'oeuvre. The glyas, as they were called, were bred for eating, kept in special jars called gliraria. Yes, jars with little air holes and climbing ledges inside, where they were fattened up before the big day. Kind of like a hamster spa with sinister intentions. You approach a small table where the chef slices open a roasted dormouse, belly stuffed with minced pork, pine nuts, pepper, and more honey. Always honey. The skin is crisp. The meat looks tender. You blink, you chew, you blink again. It's not bad. Think. A mix between duck and dark chicken meat, with a hint of nutty sweetness. It's rich, tiny, and weirdly elegant. Like if someone made a Cornish game, hen for ants. You lean back on a cool stone step, dormouse tail still on your plate, and wonder how many of these tiny beasts you'd need to feel full. A dozen? 20? Probably depends on how many amphorae of wine you've paired them with. The Romans were extravagant, but also oddly precise. Even their weirdness had rules. And dormice weren't just food, they were status. If you served them at a dinner party, you were signaling wealth and sophistication. Or maybe just that you enjoyed unnerving your guests. Historians still argue whether dormouse consumption was widespread among elites or mostly for special occasions. But archaeological finds suggest they were bred deliberately enough to matter. You watch as a merchant adds them to a silver tray, garnished with fig leaves and tiny edible flowers. Not exactly fast food, but imagine showing up at your friend's barbecue with a bag of stuffed rodents and a bottle of wine. You'd either be banned or celebrated forever. And while you're mulling that over, another curiosity passes by. A girl balancing a tray stacked with batellus, blood sausages. She's headed for the bathhouse, where tired bodies need protein. Made from pigs, blood, rice, and herbs. It's another comfort dish that makes modern diners squirm. But you try a slice. It's smoky, surprisingly soft, almost sweet. Now, for another stomach turner, pickled sow's womb. Yes, you heard that right. Called vulvae porcas condite, this delicacy involved salting, boiling, and marinating the womb in wine and spices. Roman texts describe it as tender, gelatinous, and a favorite in high-end feasts. You gently pass on that one too. There's adventurous, and then there's that. Oh, but it gets better, or worse, depending on your gag reflex. At the next stall, there's a recipe being recreated from Apicius, the Roman cookbook. It's flamingo tongue. Yes, the tongue of a flamingo, described as delicately flavored, slightly fishy, and very chewy. Romans prized its rarity and texture. There's no actual flamingo here tonight, thankfully, but the idea lingers like a shadow over the whole plaza. There are also rumors, hard to prove but titillating, that peacock brains and parrot tongues made appearances on especially extravagant menus. Were these delicacies common? Probably not, but real enough that someone, somewhere, requested a live peacock just to pluck its thoughts out. Still, you find a happy middle ground. Lukaniki, Roman sausages stuffed with minced meat, pepper, cumin, and a liberal splash of garum. Spicy, meaty, and much less emotionally complex than womb or tongue. You take two. You want to feel normal again. There's a cook rolling out a strange pudding. You ask what's in it. He says, sheep's brains, eggs, and honey. Sweet and savory. It's called a fella cerebellum. You take a bite. It's like flan if it studied anatomy and liked practical jokes. You're not alone in your confusion. Romans themselves joked about their food. Satirical poets poked fun at gourmet trends, complaining about bizarre dishes and foodies who pretended to enjoy them. One writer mocked a dinner party featuring roasted parrot and fried jellyfish. Yes, jellyfish, slippery and chewy. You pray you won't encounter that tonight. Still, as strange as it all sounds, there's something endearing about the Roman palate. They weren't wasteful. They were curious. If a part of an animal existed, they found a way to eat it. With sauce. Even crocodile meat made an appearance in some far-flung corners of the empire, especially in Egypt. Historians still argue whether it was considered exotic delicacy or local peasant fare. You're spared a crocodile skewer for now, but keep your eyes peeled. You never know with Rome. One more oddity. A sweet made of mashed figs and ants. Dried and ground, used for crunch and tang. Romans believed certain bugs had medicinal properties or symbolic meanings. You chew thoughtfully on a fig cake and pray it's just poppy seeds. You glance down an alley lit by flickering torches. Somewhere deep inside, someone is boiling goat, stomach filled with pine nuts, mint, and onions. It's Pagurus farcitus, and it smells like a mistake, but your nose is probably just tired. You smile weakly and step away. Your palate is spinning. Honey-glazed brains, flamingo fantasies, dormice in jars. Rome doesn't just feed you, it dares you. It challenges what you think food should be, what a meal means, what luxury or desperation can cook up. You pause beside a wall scribbled with graffiti. Sina sumpta, stomachus dolet. Dinner is done and my stomach hurts. You nod. Someone, 2 years ago, felt exactly like you do right now. But Rome isn't finished feeding you yet. Next up, sweet stuff. Yes, finally, dessert. The city glows differently now. As the meat smoke thins and the fishy haze fades, something softer drifts into your nose. Warmth, spice. A quiet sweetness curling through the alleys like a lullaby. You follow it without question, because finally, after garum and dormice and wombs, you've earned something nice. Dessert. Now, don't expect chocolate or croissants. Ancient Rome didn't have cocoa, and sugar was a luxury so rare it was practically mythical. Instead, Roman sweets came from what they did have in abundance: honey, fruit, nuts, and imagination. You drift past a bakery where a boy fans a small fire beneath a bronze pot. Inside it, melke. Think of it like an ancient pudding. Cheese curds mixed with flour, egg, and a heavy spoonful of honey. It bubbles lazily as he stirs, thickening into something creamy and comforting. You get a taste. It's mild, but warm, like ricotta that believes in dessert. Not cloying, just enough sweetness to lull your tongue into a daze. Over near the counter, a tray of small golden cakes cools beside a basket of pomegranates. These are globuli, fried cheese balls soaked in honey and sprinkled with poppy seeds. You bite one. The outside crunches just enough to give way to a tender, cheesy middle that melts like sleepy thoughts. It's rich and delicate, like something you'd crave after surviving a gladiator show. And yes, they fried desserts. A lot. Not deep fryers and sizzling oil baths like today. but shallow pans of lard or olive oil, depending on your wealth or appetite. If it sizzled and dripped honey, it was dessert. At the next stall, a woman kneads dough for scriblita, a proto-donut, flattened dough discs, fried until golden, then brushed with, you guessed it, more honey. She hands you one hot from the pan. The crust is flaky and warm, the inside still soft. You chew slowly, sleepily. You pass another vendor arranging fig, cakes, into careful stacks. Panis fickelneus, they're called. Just mashed figs mixed with chopped nuts, sometimes almond, sometimes hazelnut, and a touch of black pepper for contrast. The Romans didn't separate sweet and spicy the way we do. Their palates liked confusion. You sample a bite. It's dense, chewy, with the kind of slow sweetness that doesn't hit you at first, but spreads, like warm sunlight. The pepper gives it a subtle kick. Not enough to wake you up, just enough to make your tongue tilt its head, curious. Nearby, a young girl hands out dulcia domestica. Home sweets, she calls them. Dates stuffed with nuts, then rolled in coarse salt, and sometimes even wrapped in thin slices of bacon before roasting. The balance is wild, savory, salty, and sweet, all at once. Your brain tries to categorize it and promptly gives up. You just smile, licking honey from your fingers. A street musician plucks at a lyre as you drift past carts filled with dried fruit. Figs, raisins, apricots. Rome was big on preservation, and dried fruits were a kind of everyday treat, like candy with a chewy conscience. You try a dried fig, rolled in crushed almonds. A bit gritty, but satisfying, like an edible yawn. Further down the way, you see something strange. A bowl of pine nuts simmering in wine, thickened into a kind of porridge. This is patina de piris, a pear and nut custard. Sometimes it's baked, sometimes cooked gently like oatmeal. You take a spoonful. The texture's soft, the flavor complex. Fruit, herbs, a little vinegar tang hiding underneath. It's like the dessert equivalent of a long, weird dream. And then, because the Romans never stopped surprising you, there's a candy made of sesame and poppy seeds, sesamina et papaverata. It's sticky, hard to chew, and vaguely medicinal, but somehow calming, like chewing on thyme. Some scholars argue about whether these were everyday sweets or reserved for festivals. Recipes like these are tucked into dusty cookbooks like Apicius, but also scribbled as marginal notes on amphorae. Historians still debate if the masses regularly indulged in desserts, or if this was mostly an upper-class luxury. But here, tonight, you see everyone snacking on something sweet. Kids chasing each other with sticky fingers, old men trading candied plums for gossip. Sweetness was a social thing, a way to slow down after garum-soaked meals and the roaring pace of Roman life. There's one more curious treat, must cakes, called mustache, made with grape must, basically the first juice from pressing grapes, mixed with flour and aniseed, then baked on bay leaves. They smell like licorice and warm dirt. Earthy, floral, oddly nostalgic, even if you've never had one before. You take a bite and feel like you should be reclining in a garden somewhere, wine in hand, sandals off. You notice now that many desserts involve layering. Figs wrapped in pastry, nuts tucked in dates, cheese folded into dough. Romans liked their sweets like they liked their politics. Complex, a little sneaky, and always dressed in honey. You pass a couple arguing over whether libum, a kind of sacred cheesecake, should be offered to the gods or just eaten with extra honey. Libum was originally an offering, sure, but that didn't stop people from nibbling. A soft cheese bread, sometimes made with eggs, sometimes not. The texture is somewhere between cake and bread, depending on the cook's mood. You try a piece. It's gentle, almost reverent. Somewhere behind you, someone shouts about cinnamon. Another argument. Was cinnamon native or imported? Was it cassia? Did they know the difference? Historians still argue whether the spices used in Roman sweets were true imports or domestic mimics, but whatever it was, it smelled good, and that's all anyone cared about really. As you wind your way out of the dessert district, arms sticky and belly warm, the city starts to shift again. Lanterns flicker, voices lower. You're surrounded by sleepier sounds, water dripping from eaves, distant footsteps, a baby crying, somewhere far off. The food has done its job. Not just filled your stomach, but slowed your thoughts. Every bite a nudge toward rest. From brain fritters to sesame candy, this empire has coaxed you through the weirdest meal of your life. And yet somehow, it all fits. You lean on a marble column and exhale through your nose, sticky with honey and dreams. Rome is winding down, and just in time too, because what's next? You're going shopping. You stretch, slow and lazy, like a cat that's eaten an entire aviary. The night air is cooler now, the heat of Roman hearths fading as the city exhales into twilight. Sweetness still lingers on your breath, but your feet are already moving again. Because as strange as it sounds, dessert was only the intermission. Now comes the show. You drift toward the Macellum, Rome's bustling marketplace. Not the dusty vegetable stand on the corner, but the full theatrical production of consumerism, Roman style. Picture rows of stalls, all carved into the colonnade of a grand rectangular courtyard. Marble columns, decorative fountains, a shrine to Mercury tucked neatly into the wall, just in case someone needed divine permission to haggle. The vendors are still here, still bickering and barking, even at this hour. You spot a woman with a scale in one hand and a wriggling eel in the other. Behind her, shelves grown with jars of dried herbs, fermented sauces, salted fish, cured meats, and baskets of preserved lemons that glow like captured sun. You pass racks of terra sigillata pottery, shiny red bowls stamped with names you'll never pronounce. These aren't cheap souvenirs. These are the Pyrex of their day, prized for their heat resistance and smooth finish. Every Roman kitchen worth its garum had a few. You run your fingers across one. Cool, smooth, still bearing the fingerprint of the man who made it, centuries before fingerprints meant anything official. Just beyond that, there's a table draped with woven linens, mostly flax and wool, dyed, with crushed berries and possibly the blood of unfortunate shellfish. Yes, real purple dye, Tyrian purple, came from thousands of tiny sea snails, boiled and rotted into a rich royal hue. It smelled terrible, cost a fortune, and signaled power. Historians still argue whether Rome used true Tyrian purple for all purple garments, or if many citizens faked it with berries. But you can smell the real thing from here, like the ocean and something worse. You spot a basket of bronze cooking tools, long skewers, delicate tongs, perforated ladles. One vendor offers you a mortarium, a clay mixing bowl with a rough interior for grinding spices. He gestures at your belly and laughs. To help digest all those dormice, he says. You nod, respectfully. Further down, the stalls get more specialized. You see a table of cosmetic jars, tiny, intricately carved, filled with creams made from rendered animal fat, olive oil, and crushed minerals. One smells suspiciously like crocodile dung. Yes, really, some Roman women used it as a skin treatment. Did it work? Hard to say, but it certainly made a statement. You lift the lid, sniff once, and gently slide it away. Perfumes, however, are another matter entirely. Oil-based, mixed with myrrh, rose petals, and spices like cinnamon and cardamom. Expensive, heady, and guaranteed to cover the scent of pickled sow's womb. You dab a little behind your ear, immediately feel 3% more imperial. A man sells wax, tablets, and styluses for note-taking. You watch a child etch what might be a donkey, or perhaps a chariot with legs. Hard to say. The tablet's surface is smudged and soft from constant rewriting. Roman children practiced their letters here, and adults jotted shopping lists, accounts, or very passive-aggressive notes to nosy neighbors. You run a fingertip over the wax, still, faintly warm from the day's heat. The stylus is bronze, worn smooth on the writing end and pointed on the opposite side, for erasing. It's a humble thing, but useful. Everyday magic. In a time before sticky notes or reminders pinging on your phone, this was how you remembered to buy figs and not die of debt. Past the writing supplies, you find jewelry stands. Bronze and silver mostly. Gold was a little flashy unless you were showing off. Rings engraved with Latin slogans like Amor vincit omnia, love conquers all, or just initials. You slip one on. It fits perfectly, as if waiting for you since BCE. Next to the rings, amulets. Little carved figures of Mercury, Venus, and the occasional fascinum, a good luck charm shaped like a winged phallus. You stare for a moment. The vendor shrugs. Protection, he says. Sure, why not? At a more practical table, baskets of shoes, sandals with tightly knotted leather, some reinforced with hobnails for traction. Others are soft, indoor shoes, barely more than decorated slippers. You try one on. It squeaks. The vendor frowns. You move on. You pause by a stall that sells writing ink. The inkwell smells earthy, tinged with iron. Most Roman ink was a mixture of soot or lamp black with water and gum arabic. Simple, but effective. Some higher-end inks included gallnut extracts or wine. You could literally write letters with Merlot. You drift past a weapons merchant. Nothing flashy, just kitchen knives, utility blades, and the occasional small dagger. These aren't gladiator fare. These are tools for butchers and bakers. A woman examines a cleaver and haggles in hushed tones. You quietly step away. And then, like finding a record shop in a hardware store, you stumble into the book corner. Not books like ours, scrolls, volumina, rolled papyrus or parchment stored in cubbies or crates. Some are state documents, others personal letters. One looks like a recipe scroll, another might be part of a legal contract. There's even one with some very questionable poetry that rhymes armor with dollar more than once. You chuckle. Not much has changed. A young man reads aloud to no one in particular, practicing his oration as his friends ignore him. His voice floats over the square, mixing with the smell of olives, smoke, and old stone. Somewhere above you, a shadow flickers, a cat on a ledge, or maybe a spirit. You can never quite tell in Rome. The market closes slowly, like a yawn. Merchants pack away their wares. A cart creaks as it rolls toward a quieter street. The lanterns dim, one by one. But before you leave, one last stall catches your eye. A man carving small wooden toys. Dolls with jointed arms, spinning tops, miniature chariots. He doesn't speak, just nods as you pick one up. It's a horse. It rocks gently in your hand. You place it back down. And with that, your arms full of nothing and everything. You step out of the macellum. Your stomach's full, your head heavier than before. Rome isn't just built on bricks and concrete. It's built on stuff. On pottery and pastries, perfume and parchment. On sandals and spoons and scrolls full of half-finished thoughts. And you've touched almost all of it. Now you think, just maybe, you're ready for a good Roman nap. But don't lie down just yet, because what's next? You're going bathing. You feel it before you see it. A deep, slow warmth rising through the pavement, scented with eucalyptus, damp stone, and something musky that might be ambition, or just a really expensive beard oil. You're at the Thermae, Rome's answer to the spa, the gym, the coffee shop, and maybe a bit of social media, all rolled into one. Bathhouses weren't just for washing off the grime of the city. They were for seeing and being seen, for gossip, exercise, meditation, and sometimes a bit of political maneuvering in a towel. You step inside the apoditerium, the changing room. Mosaics glitter beneath your feet. Swirls of dolphins and sea monsters chasing each other into eternity. Naked men lounge against the walls, slapping each other's backs and debating whether the emperor's beard is in or just a phase. You find a cubby and pretend not to notice a man trying to quote Homer while flexing his calves. Your sandals come off. Your tunic drops. Modesty doesn't really apply here. No one's looking, and everyone's definitely looking. Next you pass into the Pala Estra, the exercise courtyard. Think of it as ancient CrossFit without the Instagram. You dodge a leather ball mid-air, tossed by two men panting dramatically. Off to the side, a wiry teenager practices discus throws, dangerously close to a philosopher muttering into a scroll. A trio of older men stretches awkwardly, as if trying to remember what their backs used to do. You stretch too, if only to feel like part of it. The air here is thick with effort, and the clanging of bronze dumbbells. Yes, they had those. Nothing adjustable, just solid, clunky weights that clink when dropped. Historians still argue whether serious training happened here or in private gyms. But judging by the sweat in the air, you suspect plenty happened right here. But it's not the workout you came for. It's the water. You pass into the tepidarium, the warm room. It's like slipping into a dream. The walls are heated from within. Rome's underfloor heating, called hypocaust, is in full swing. Hot air moves through flues beneath the stone floor and rises behind the walls, turning this space into a gentle oven. Your feet are warm. Your skin glistens almost instantly. You sit on a stone bench, back resting against smooth tile, and breathe. Then comes the caldarium, the hot room. You're warned, not with words, but by the visible shimmer of heat as you enter. The temperature spikes. Steam curls from the water basin in the center like ghostly hands. Your lungs adjust slowly, like stretching your thoughts into softness. You dip into the plunge pool. It's not just hot, it's aggressive. The kind of heat that makes your brain loosen from its skull. A slave pours warm water over your shoulders with a bronze ladle, and you swear you almost forget where you are. You sweat. Not a nervous sweat, or the kind that tells you to run. This is surrender. Every pore opens. Every muscle sighs. The tension in your calves, your jaw, your eyelids, it all melts. And just when you think you'll dissolve completely into soup, it's time for the strigil. A man steps forward, smiling like this is perfectly normal, which it is. He holds a curved bronze tool. The strigil is for scraping away sweat, dirt, and oil. Not delicate, not painful either. Just thorough. He slathers your skin in oil, olive, of course, maybe with a hint of lavender if he's feeling fancy, and scrapes you down, one long motion at a time. You glisten. Then you gleam. Then you are, essentially, buffed into a statue of yourself. You think about that, how Romans oiled and scraped themselves like prized furniture. The sensation leaves you oddly clean, not sterile, just polished, softened. You shuffle now into the frigidarium, the cold plunge. And let's be honest, you hesitate. The water looks like melted marble, still, waiting. But in you go, one breath, one plunge. Your heart contracts, your limbs jolt, and then peace. Your body resets. Everything else, the heat, the food, the honey, clicks into balance. You drift there a moment, almost boneless, staring up at the dome ceiling where painted birds soar in an eternal mosaic sky. People around you are quiet now. Whispers, the kind that never really reach your ears. Someone is laughing gently. Someone else is asleep on a bench. The light filters through steam like fog over a battlefield that's already been cleaned. In one corner, a young woman reads aloud from a scroll. Her voice barely lifts above the drip of condensation. She's reciting a recipe, oddly enough. Something about pickled cucumbers and fish sauce. You smile. Of course she is. Nearby, two older men argue about whether cold plunges build character or just prevent gout. Historians still argue whether regular bathing in Rome was as hygienic as it was symbolic. Was this about health or about hierarchy? A way to scrub away your peasant status for an afternoon? You don't know. But you do know this. You're clean, inside and out. Not just washed, rinsed of urgency, of anything that doesn't belong here in this room of steam and echo. You leave the bath wrapped in a light linen cloth, moving slower now, as if the stone itself has massaged your bones into jelly. Your hair's damp, your skin hums. Back in the apoditerium, you dress again, a little looser, a little more Roman. You've bathed like a senator, like a poet, like someone who understands that to clean the body is to quiet the mind. But before the sleep can fully settle in, you feel a familiar tug. You're going to the races. The ground rumbles before you hear it. A deep, bone-shaking vibration that starts in your toes and climbs up behind your eyes. You don't walk, you're drawn, pulled along in a slow, inevitable current of people. Men in tunics and women in stolas, kids on shoulders, vendors with baskets strapped to their chests, all heading in the same direction, toward thunder, toward spectacle, toward the Circus Maximus. This is not some polite little afternoon pastime. This is Rome's version of Formula One, the Super Bowl, and a stampede all rolled into one thunderous dust cloud. Chariot races. The sport that made emperors popular, bankrupted aristocrats, and occasionally caused small riots. You shuffle with the crowd through the archway into the arena. The Circus Maximus opens before you like a canyon carved by screams. It's massive, bigger than any sports stadium you've ever imagined, able to hold over 150 people at its peak. That's 3 times the population of some modern cities, all crammed together, yelling and sweating and flinging curses at men on horses. You find a seat midway up. Not too elite, not too peasant. Just perfect. The sun angles low now, casting a golden shimmer across the sand track. You can see the spina, the long barrier down the middle of the track, lined with statues, obelisks, and lap counters shaped like dolphins. 7 laps. Always 7. You catch your breath as the teams line up. 4 main factions: the reds, whites, blues, and greens. More than just colours. These are identities. People live and die by their favourite faction. There's old graffiti in back alleys that literally reads, "I support the blues, and I don't care who knows it." You watch as a man draped in green robes clutches a fistful of bets and mutters to himself. His teeth are missing, but his confidence is intact. The chariots are pulled by teams of 4 horses each, quadrigi. The drivers are wiry, tense, barely restrained bundles of muscle and guts. Most are slaves or freedmen. A few are so famous their names are sung in taverns. Gaius Apuleius Diocles, for example, who reportedly won thousands of races and retired richer than most senators. Historians still argue whether those winnings were exaggerated, but it's agreed he was a superstar. Trumpets blare. Not the dainty kind. These are long, coiled war horns that shake the air like thunder. And then, the gates burst open. Dust flies up in a screaming arc. Horses surge forward, hooves pounding, wheels spinning, sand spraying like a curtain of golden mist. The crowd roars, a million lungs emptying at once. You grip the edge of your seat. The chariots whip around the mete, the curved ends of the track, perilously close to the stone. One bad angle and they'll crash. One bad angle and they'll crash, tumbling into a kaleidoscope of wheels, reins, and flailing limbs. And sometimes they do. You watch one driver, maybe from the Reds, misjudge the turn. His chariot tilts violently, a wheel shatters, and he goes flying like a tossed rag doll into the sand. Gasps echo. A medic team, or the Roman version of one, rushes in. But the race doesn't stop. It never does. The surviving horses gallop onward, their drivers crouched low, eyes fixed on the finish. You blink and realize you're screaming along with the rest of them. Charioteers wear leather helmets and tight-fitting tunics, but most notably, they wrap the reins around their waists, not their hands. That means control comes with a price. If the chariot crashes, they either cut themselves loose with the small dagger tucked in their belt, or they get dragged to a very messy retirement. Not a peaceful job. Yet they chase glory like moths to fire. Victors get statues, fan clubs, even offers of marriage. You spot a group of teenage girls squealing every time the blue team rounds the curve. One waves a crude clay figure that vaguely resembles a driver with wild hair. The races aren't just about speed. They're about strategy. Drivers hold back, cut others off, even whip rival horses when the officials aren't looking. And the crowd thrives on it. They boo, cheer, chant, and sometimes throw food, usually at the greens, depending on the year. There's a kind of choreography to the chaos. Laps marked with bronze dolphins tip forward at each turn. The 7th dolphin finally tips, and it's a photo finish. Not that there are photos. The blues edge ahead by half a chariot length. Their fans erupt. Total strangers hug, cry, and vow undying loyalty to their team. You watch one old man throw his wine cup in celebration, then curse his own enthusiasm as the cup shatters. Winners are paraded around the arena. Horses are praised almost as much as the drivers, sometimes more. People shout their names like ancient celebrity gossip. "That's Perseus, son of Titania. He won the spring race last year." A musician strikes up a victory tune on a tibia, a sort of double-piped flute. It's bright and celebratory, but you can barely hear it over the continuing mayhem. The victorious driver holds up his whip like a trophy. You suspect he'll be swarmed by fans and bribes later, but as the dust settles and the track is raked smooth again, you notice something stranger. Off to the side, near the lower ranks of seating, a pair of men whisper behind a scroll. Not betting, not chatting, plotting. It's no secret that the chariot factions sometimes got entangled in politics. More than once, the blues and greens stirred up riots that rocked entire cities. Historians still argue whether the sport itself drove the unrest or merely gave it a place to stretch its legs. But in this moment, it feels obvious. When passions run this hot, even emperors have to pay attention. You exhale slowly. Your throats roar from shouting, your tunic smells faintly of horse, and your heart's still drumming from the chaos. But there's a kind of satisfaction in it too. A reminder that the Romans, disciplined, engineering-minded, empire builders, that they were also loved wild, dusty, screaming fun. As the arena clears out and the sunlight begins to fade, the roar quiets to murmurs. You step down the stone stairs, each one warm from the thousands of feet before you. You leave the Circus Maximus behind, your ears ringing, your heart full, your brain surprisingly tired. And just when you think things might calm down, a breeze brushes your cheek, carrying with it a new scent. Sweet, pungent, almost floral. Perfume. You're going shopping again. But this time, it's luxury only. The streets narrow as you walk, and the noise from the races fades into the hum of foot traffic and conversation. Paved stones glisten faintly with the day's dust, and from behind wooden shutters, the smell of lavender, myrrh, and warmed olive oil coils through the air like gossip. You're headed into the world of luxury, where bath oils cost more than dinner, where garum isn't just fermented fish sauce, it's aged fermented fish sauce, and where every little thing comes in a tiny, delicate bottle. You pass a row of market stalls, each more refined than the last. No apples and onions here. No fried cheese on sticks. These vendors deal in precious glass flasks, imported spices, jewelry with ridiculous amounts of detail, and enough fragrance to knock out a small army of gladiators. This isn't the marketplace for the average Roman citizen. This is for those with coin, connections, and a certain appetite for things that sparkle. You pause at a perfume merchant's stall. Rows of tiny amphorae, some no bigger than your thumb, glint in the sun. Their contents shimmer. Oils, balms, powders. He lifts one gently and uncorks it. The scent hits you like a warm breeze from the east. Rose, cinnamon, maybe a hint of something like pine. He tells you it's Susinum, a luxury blend of lily, myrrh, and olive oil. Popular with wealthy women and especially favored by Cleopatra, or so the gossip goes. Historians still argue whether that particular blend was actually named after her or just repurposed from older Egyptian recipes. Either way, it's potent. You dab a bit on your wrist. Instantly, you smell like someone with 10 servants and a questionable relationship with a senator. Further down the road, another stall boasts ivory combs and tweezers, and a fine selection of coal pots. Roman makeup wasn't subtle. Both men and women used powdered minerals to line their eyes, tint their lips, and give their cheeks that slightly sunstruck glow. And yes, sometimes that makeup contained lead. But what's a little poisoning in pursuit of beauty? You stop before a glassblower's display. Here, you don't just buy the thing. You buy the container, the prestige, the lifestyle. Tiny bottles with swirling colors catch the light like trapped rainbows. One particularly expensive piece is shaped like a dolphin, another a miniature amphora that opens with a satisfying click. You imagine keeping vinegar in one just to confuse your guests. In a private alcove nearby, shaded by heavy curtains, a wealthy woman is trying on rings. The merchant is laying them out on velvet like sacred relics. One ring has an emerald the size of a pigeon's eye. Another is carved with a tiny scene, Cupid stealing grapes from a sleeping satyr. Delicate and unnecessarily specific. You catch snatches of their conversation. She's deciding between sending a gift to her sister or to her lover's wife, depending on who's been more difficult this week. Luxury in Rome was more than wealth. It was a kind of weapon. You could declare your status with a toga made of impossibly fine wool, or a brooch from Alexandria, or perfume that took a dozen workers weeks to prepare. And if someone showed up wearing nard from India, you could bet they weren't planning to leave quietly. Even food could be weaponized elegance. Truffle honey, flamingo tongues, peacock eggs. All things no normal Roman would bother with. But the wealthy? They curated their meals the way emperors curated their mistresses, loudly and with more indulgence than restraint. And of course, there were the cosmeti, slaves trained in the delicate art of beautification, hairdressers, manicurists, perfumers, all working behind the scenes. These were the unsung artists of elite vanity, and if you were lucky, you might get one who could sculpt a hairstyle worthy of being immortalized in marble. You round the corner and come upon a private taberna medicamentaria, a kind of elite apothecary. Shelves of tiny labelled jars line the walls. Ointments for smoother skin, powders for less oily foreheads, mixtures that promise everything from a clearer voice to fewer dreams. Some of them include crushed pearls or saffron, ingredients you'd be better off eating, but no one's here for logic. One particularly strange little bottle claims to prevent aging. It smells like mint and regret. Historians still argue whether Roman anti-aging creams worked at all, or if they were just selling expensive hope in fancy jars. You lean in to examine a wax tablet where someone's written a list of available treatments. Under personal care are some creative entries. Crocodile dung face mask, yes really, vinegar foot soaks, and something called a spiderweb wrinkle patch. It's unclear whether that one uses actual spiders, but you're afraid to ask. The world of luxury is absurd, but it's also deeply Roman. They didn't just want comfort, they wanted recognition. Every purchase, every cent, every ring was a whisper to the crowd. I have arrived. You may notice me now. And somehow, amid the glitter and the perfume, you start to feel like maybe you could pass for someone important too. Maybe not a senator, but someone who knows how to recline at a banquet without knocking over their wine cup. You drift away from the stall with a lingering trace of serenum still dancing around your pulse points. It's fading now, settling into something softer, something sleepier. The light shifts again, slipping toward dusk. And as you follow the winding lane back toward home, you hear something faint but unmistakable. Music, rhythmic, cheeky, maybe even a little sloppy. It's coming from the door of a popinner. You're about to crash a Roman tavern. The wooden door swings inward on creaky hinges, and you're hit with a wall of warmth, noise, and the unmistakable aroma of spiced wine and recently grilled meat. The Popina, Rome's local tavern, is not polite society. It's crowded, smoky, rowdy, and smells like someone tried to mop the floor with garlic. You step over the threshold and immediately feel your sandals stick slightly to the stone floor. A good sign, honestly. The stickier the floor, the more real the experience. Low tables are crammed into every corner, occupied by men in various states of relaxation. Some are toasting, others are arguing about dice rolls, and at least one man is snoring face first into a plate of lentils. You think about joining him, but not yet. The tavern keeper, a heavy-set woman with her hair in a twist and arms that could throw a soldier across the room, gives you a curt nod. She gestures you toward an open table near the back, next to a mural of Dionysus looking very pleased with himself, surrounded by what appear to be tipsy goats. You sit. A server arrives with a wooden tray. No menu, of course. Just options barked in rapid-fire Latin. Vinum calidum, hot wine spiced with honey and pepper. Lucanicae, spicy sausages sizzling from a nearby grill. And maritum, a kind of garlic and cheese paste served with rough bread. You go with all three. You're not here to nibble. The wine arrives first. It's warm and sweet, like drinking mulled syrup with a faint aftertaste of old amphorae. It's a far cry from the overpriced wine bars of modern cities, but in this dim, smoky den, it tastes like the beginning of a bad decision. The sausages arrive next, still spitting grease. You bite in and nearly weep. Spicy, salty, and unapologetically oily. The maritum spreads like a punchy garlic bomb across the crusty bread. And just like that, you're a believer. Across the room, a group of dice players are cursing dramatically. One slams a clay cup down so hard it cracks, sending tiny tally, Roman knucklebone dice, skittering across the floor. Gambling is illegal technically, except during Saturnalia, or if you're discreet enough. But in here, the law feels more like a suggestion. You lean back and watch as one man, clearly on a losing streak, offers up his sandals as collateral. His opponent accepts with a smirk. Somewhere, a donkey brays. You're not entirely sure if it's outside or inside. Taverns like this weren't just places to eat and drink. They were social pressure valves. A mix of classes came here. Freedmen, merchants, off-duty soldiers, maybe the occasional senator slumming it for the thrill. You might hear the latest gossip, catch a traveling musician, or find yourself suddenly involved in a knife fight over whether the blues or the greens are better at chariot racing, which is why some emperors tried to shut these places down or limit their hours. Didn't work. A man at the next table raises his cup to you. You raise yours back, and for a moment, you're not a time traveler, or a tourist, or a sleep-deprived narrator. You're just another Roman having a drink after a long day of bread, circuses, and weirdly expensive perfume. And then comes the entertainment. A young musician pulls out a cithara, a kind of Roman lyre, and begins to pluck a tune. It's meandering, almost sleepy, like a lullaby that wandered into a party. Another man joins in with a pair of hand cymbals, adding a light rhythm that might have made sense 10 sips ago. People clap along, offbeat and enthusiastic. There's singing now, a drunken chorus that includes lyrics about a goat, a magistrate, and something scandalous involving fish sauce. You don't catch every word, but the melody is infectious. Even the tavern keeper sways a little as she wipes down the counter with a rag older than the Republic. You sip your wine and sink deeper into the bench. The garlic haze wraps around you like a warm scarf. Somewhere nearby, a couple argues playfully about whether flamingo meat is overrated. One of them insists that boiled dormice are the true delicacy of the empire. The other replies with a burp. It's not glamorous, it's not sophisticated, but it is alive. And sometimes, that's all anyone really wants. A warm drink, some salty meat, and a place to let the day drain out of your bones. Before you leave, the tavern keeper gives you a small nod and slides you a leftover sausage wrapped in fig leaf. For the road, she says, and you could cry. You stumble out into the night. The air has cooled, and the stars are hazy above the tiled rooftops. You sway slightly, full of warmth and fermented cheer. But Rome isn't done with you yet, because just ahead, lanterns are flickering, curtains are parting, and someone in a dramatic wig is shouting about vengeance and destiny. You've just wandered into the world of Roman theatre. The glow of oil lamps spills out onto the stone-paved plaza, pooling around wooden benches and folding stools. You drift closer, still tasting garlic on your breath and warm wine in your chest, as the makeshift curtain pulls aside and the stage flickers to life. The theatrum isn't grand tonight. This isn't one of the massive stone theatres funded by an emperor trying to buy votes with laughter. No, this is street theatre, pop-up drama, portable poetry. And it's glorious. The crowd hushes just a little, just enough. You're standing among toe-gate old men, olive sellers, pickpockets, children licking bits of honeycomb stuck to their fingers. Everyone's waiting. Then suddenly, a burst of cymbals. A man in a towering mask strides forward, robes billowing, voice booming. "Oh, Fortune, thou double-faced kitchen maid, you're not entirely sure what that means, but it's said with such conviction that you lean in anyway." Roman theatre loves a spectacle. Actors wear masks that exaggerate expressions, grief, rage, lust, confusion, because from 20 rows back, subtlety is useless. Those masks, often made of linen coated in plaster, serve two purposes: to project emotion and to amplify the voice through a built-in mouthpiece. They also allow one actor to play multiple roles, which is handy when half the cast is already drunk or missing. The play tonight? A classic fabula palliata, a Roman comedy adapted from Greek originals. Think mistaken identities, lazy slaves, boastful soldiers, scheming women, and always, always someone hiding in a closet. You follow the plot in waves. Every now and then, it dips into full-on slapstick. Someone falls down. Someone else steals a purse. A third character pretends to be his own twin. It's ridiculous, and the crowd is loving it. Beside you, a young boy claps like he's watching the gods themselves perform. His mother half laughs, half shushes him. You wonder briefly, if the actors are improvising some of the dialogue, it feels a little too timely, especially the part where the old miser complains about new taxes. Historically, some playwrights, Plautus and Terence among them, were known for their sharp wit and wordplay. Their works were performed on festival, days like the Ludi Romani, sponsored by magistrates eager for public favour. But these street troops, they do it for coin, applause, and maybe a leftover sausage if they're lucky. One actor breaks character for a moment to wink at the crowd after a particularly loud fart joke. He earns a round of applause. No shame in low humour. Romans love it. Nothing brings people together quite like a well-timed bodily noise in the middle of a monologue about lost love. Still, theatre wasn't always safe work. Performers were often slaves or freedmen, considered disreputable by polite society, even while adored by the public. Some became celebrities, with fans tossing garlands onto the stage, carving their names into walls, even stalking them outside. The bathhouses. Sound familiar? Historians still argue whether actors held more sway in politics than they let on. Some played parts that subtly mocked senators or current events, coded satire that let the audience laugh without naming names. It was theatre as pressure valve again, just like the tavern, a mirror held up to empire, but with pratfalls. As the play reaches its climax, someone's hiding behind a curtain now, possibly in drag. The music kicks up. Flutes and tambourines, a rattling sistrum from Egypt, a low beat tapped out on a hand drum. The rhythm pulses through your bones. Even the pigeons roosting in nearby niches seem to tap their feet. The resolution comes swiftly. Identities revealed, lovers reunited, the miser tricked out of his money. Everyone cheers. The actors bow with exaggerated flair. Coins are tossed. One lands at your feet. You pick it up and pass it forward. It's only right. But the show's not quite over. Out steps a poet. Younger, quieter, carrying only a scroll. He begins to recite, not a comedy, not a speech, but something softer. A lament, perhaps, about a soldier who never came home. About a girl who watched ships fade from a harbour. About Rome itself. So grand, so flawed, so beautifully full of contradictions. And for a moment everything hushes again. You hear the creak of a rope, the hiss of a lamp. Someone sniffles behind you. A dog barks in the distance, then quiets. The poet finishes. No bow, just a nod. And then he disappears behind the curtain. The applause is gentle this time. Not because the crowd didn't love it, but because the spell hasn't broken yet. You stand there longer than you mean to, feeling something settle in your chest. Maybe it's nostalgia for a time you've never lived. Or maybe it's just the wine catching up. The bench is clear. The musicians pack up. A girl wraps leftover, props in cloth, The actor with the fart joke slips back into the street crowd like a ghost shedding a borrowed face. You turn and start walking again, following the gentle slope of a lantern-lit road. The theatre lingers with you, like a tune half remembered, like a line you almost understood. And as you round the next corner, the scent of baked honey and roasted nuts curls through the air. Someone's roasting chestnuts in a brazier, but that's not where you're headed. You're going to the Thermae, Rome's great public baths, and if the theatre was for the spirit, this next place is for the body. The stones beneath your feet are still warm from the day's sun as you shuffle toward the Thermae, the grand public baths of ancient Rome. The street narrows and you pass a marble sign etched with the name of this particular complex, Baths of Titus. Or maybe it's Caracalla's, depending on which emperor was flexing his ego that decade. Either way, you're about to enter the Roman version of self-care, equal parts spa, social club, and steamy civic arena. Inside, the air shifts. It's thick, humid, and fragrant with a blend of oil, sweat, and rosewater. The outer changing area, apoditerium, is bustling. Men unlace sandals, pull off tunics, and hand over belongings to a young attendant who glares like he's already stolen 3 towels today. You eye him suspiciously, then strip down and step cautiously onto the polished stone floor, which is both cool and vaguely slimy. You pass into the tepidarium first, the warm room, like dipping your body into a soft, invisible quilt. The temperature here is gentle, welcoming. You breathe it in, and your shoulders drop by about 3 centuries. Decorative mosaics stretch across the floor, sea creatures, swirls, mythological scenes, while sunlight filters through glass tiles in the roof. It's easy to forget that you're in the middle of a noisy metropolis. Next stop, the caldarium, the hot room. This place hits you like a wall. The heat presses against your chest, wrapping around your legs and fogging your thoughts. Steam rises from a central basin, and men sit on stone benches, beads of sweat racing down their spines. An older gentleman pours water over a red-hot brazier and lets out a contented sigh that's honestly a little inappropriate. You edge closer and try not to slip. The floor is heated from beneath by the hypocaust, a Roman marvel of engineering. Basically, the floor is floating on little brick pillars with hot air channeled beneath, like a radiant heating system built by toga-wearing HVAC geniuses. Historians still argue whether the design was originally borrowed from the Greeks or independently, invented by some Roman with cold feet and too much ambition. And then, like clockwork, it's time for the strigil. A wiry man, possibly named Gaius, approaches with a curved metal scraper. You nod, he nods, and the ritual begins. He smears olive oil across your back, murmurs something about clogged pores, and begins to scrape. Not massage, scrape. Firm strokes peel off a layer of sweat, grime, and existential regret. You've never felt cleaner or more exfoliated. Or possibly, you catch the scent before you see the lights. Sweet smoke curling through the cool air, mingling with hints of charred meat, citrus, and something unmistakably fried. Your stomach perks up like a hungry dog hearing the rustle of a bread wrapper. The Nundinae Nocturni, or night market, is in full swing. And even if your feet are sore, your curiosity and appetite are very much awake. You follow your nose and the flickering lanterns until the narrow streets open into a lively square, lined with makeshift stalls, each glowing softly under hanging oil lamps. Sellers shout over each other, hawking roasted chestnuts, sticky honey, pastries, and piping hot skewers of spiced meat. A woman ladles lentil stew from a steaming clay pot into bowls made of pressed leaves. A wiry man with 4 teeth and boundless energy flips little pancakes over a portable brazier, sprinkling them with crushed nuts and dates. You join the slow shuffle of Rome's. So here you are, shuffling through the half-silent night, stomach full of honey and herbs, legs jelly-like from the baths, and head heavy with the day's strange, salty memories, only to end up at the latrina. Yes, the communal public toilet, because no Roman evening is truly complete until you've communed with strangers over a long, chilly marble bench and a shared sponge on a stick. You find the structure at the edge of a forum square, nestled beside an ivy-covered wall. It's not hidden. In fact, it's surprisingly welcoming. Open air, lit by a row of tiny oil lamps, and surrounded by columns, as if the gods themselves sanctioned this final humble ritual. A stone plaque above the entrance reads, somewhat optimistically, Sanitas per aquam, health through water. Sure, you step inside. There's no privacy, no doors, just a continuous marble bench punctuated with evenly spaced holes. Front row seats to your own business and everyone else's. You gingerly pick a spot and sit, trying not to think too hard about anything. The floor gently slopes inward to a central channel, and behind you, a fresh stream of water runs steadily below the bench, washing everything away, ingenious in its way. Romans were fastidious about public sanitation, even if their definition of fastidious would still cause a modern health inspector to cry in Latin. Beneath you, the famed Roman sewer system, the Cloaca Maxima, whispers its eternal murmur, built centuries ago and still doing its thankless work, channeling the city's essence toward the Tiber River. Historians still argue whether its design was purely practical or partially religious, given its proximity to sacred springs and temples. You try not to spiritualize your current situation. Across from you, an older man with a receding hairline and a tunic stained with olive oil clears his throat. Nice night, he says. You nod. There's a certain camaraderie in these places. Class distinctions dissolve. Senators, slaves, merchants, and wandering snackers like you all sit cheek to cheek, if not cheek by jowl. A young boy nearby uses the tessorium, a communal sponge on the end of a stick soaked in water or vinegar, depending on how fancy your latrine is. He swishes it in a channel of running water afterward, then sets it back in the communal pot. You make a silent promise to never complain about your modern bathroom again. It's bizarrely social. Men discuss politics. Arguments break out about the best garum vendor. Someone debates the proper technique for keeping tunics white in hard water. It's like Twitter, but warmer and with worse smells. Graffiti lines the walls. Some of it's surprisingly poetic. Fortuna rides the bold, one says. Another reads, Marcus has terrible aim. Several are just crude drawings of things better left undescribed, but there's a sense of life here, raw, unfiltered, smelly life. You learn that public toilets weren't just for necessity. They were places of gossip, strategy, even business. Deals were made here, rumors born, reputations bruised. You almost feel left out not having an opinion to loudly share about a missing shipment of Egyptian linen. And the best part, it's free, maintained by the city, part of Rome's civic pride. Well, mostly. Emperor Vespasian once introduced a urine tax, famously remarking pecunia non olet. Money doesn't stink. That quote lives on today, and yes, historians still argue whether he meant it sincerely or as a pointed joke at the Senate's expense. As the latrine quiets and you rise, grateful, wiser, and possibly infected with something mild, you reflect on just how entwined Roman life was. There were no real separations between public and private, sacred and silly, filthy and formal. Bathhouse gossip flowed into market chatter, which flowed into latrine banter, which flowed, well, downstream. You step out into the night once more, the air cool and still. The stars have shifted slightly, peeking between clouds. Rome hums, but more softly now. Somewhere far off, someone laughs. A dog barks, a distant door slams. You wrap your tunic a little tighter and start walking, sandals scuffing against stone, your body tired in the best way. From a distance, the domes and columns shimmer in moonlight like giant sleeping beasts. You pass the edge of a vineyard clinging stubbornly to a hillside. You catch the scent of mint crushed underfoot. A candle flickers behind a window, casting the shadow of a woman brushing her hair. You don't know her, and you'll never see her again, but somehow she feels familiar. This night, this path, it all seems to loop endlessly. From slop to silk, from steam to sponge, the Romans lived it all without filter or pause. A full sensory civilization with a tolerance for extremes and a weirdly poetic approach to bodily functions. And you, modern time traveler that you are, survived it. Kind of. There's a twinge in your gut from that suspicious fig, and your backside may never emotionally recover from the marble bench, but you made it. You reach your quarters, a small rental tucked between two larger domus homes with ivy creeping down the facade and a wooden door that moans just a little when opened. Inside, your bed is simple, straw-stuffed, creaky, and barely large enough. But right now, it's the most luxurious thing in the world. You settle in, muscles aching in a satisfied way. Full, scrubbed, slightly violated by a sponge, and now, at peace. But don't close your eyes just yet, because tomorrow, you're meeting the gods. And they've got opinions. You wake to the sound of bells. Not loud, not clanging, just soft, rhythmic notes drifting in from a nearby temple. The sun hasn't quite made its full appearance yet, but the city is already stirring. The priests are up, of course. The gods apparently don't sleep in. You stretch, your back complaining about the straw-stuffed mattress, like a senator whining. About a tax, a quick splash of water on your face, a tug of sandals back onto tired feet, and you're off, blinking into the pale golden haze of a Roman morning. Today's itinerary? A little divine consultation. Because Rome wasn't just built on bricks and marble. It ran on rituals, omens, whispers from the divine, and the eternal hope that Jupiter wasn't in a bad mood. You wind your way to one of the city's many temples, this one dedicated to Minerva. She of wisdom, crafts, and probably tired of being lumped in with goddesses people pray to when they panic. The columns rise before you, tall and weather-worn, wrapped in ivy and incense, smoke. A few sleepy acolytes sweep the steps. One of them sneezes, and you both pause, waiting to see if that's a bad omen. He shrugs. Only if it's a Tuesday. Inside, the air changes, cooler, quieter, heavier. It's the smell of burnt offerings, rose petals, and ash. You watch a woman kneel, whispering as she leaves a small clay figure at the altar. Behind her, a priest adjusts the fire, tossing in a handful of herbs that crackle and spark. You stand a little awkwardly, unsure if you're supposed to kneel, nod, or offer the gods your leftover sweetbread from last night's market. You decide to simply watch, and hope no lightning bolts come flying your way. Religion in Rome isn't about belief the way you might expect. It's about practice, repetition, contracts. The gods aren't your buddies. They're powerful, often odi, often unpredictable, and absolutely deserving of bribes. You do the ritual, you offer the gift, and in return, maybe, just maybe, they don't ruin your harvest, sink your ship, or give your cow a weird cough. Religion in Rome is less faith and more insurance policy. You exit the temple slowly, squinting into the growing sunlight. There's more divine bureaucracy to explore. You head up the hill toward the Capitoline, where the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus stands like a god-shaped stamp on the city. Massive columns, a roof gilded in bronze, and pigeons. So many pigeons. Here, priests known as flamines oversee ceremonies that range from solemn to somewhere between interpretive dance and tax filing. You spot a harrispix, a specialist in reading omens from animal entrails, arriving with a suspiciously calm-looking sheep. You shudder a little. Someone nearby murmurs, "Big political vote today." Apparently, the gods must weigh in via liver before the Senate dares to act. Historians still argue whether the Romans truly believed in the power of divination, or if it was mostly theatre, carefully choreographed rituals to reassure the masses that someone, somewhere, was in charge. But even cynics played along. It was good form. You wouldn't want to tempt fate, or worse, embarrass yourself in front of Mars. Speaking of whom, you pass the temple of Mars Altar, Mars the Avenger. The vibe here is sharper. More stone, less incense, more sword. You imagine soldiers lining up to dedicate offerings before battle. Maybe an old spear, a lock of hair, a carved wooden shield. Some of them will never return. Others will credit the gods if they do. Mars gets results, or at least really good PR. You move on, past shrines tucked into alleyways, little household gods, lares and penates, set in niches beside doorways, often decorated with faded flowers or fresh grapes. These are the guardians of home and hearth. Less flashy maybe, but somehow more comforting. You pause at one, whisper a thank you under your breath, and continue. Now you find yourself at a curious gathering near the edge of the forum. A semicircle of people has formed, staring skyward. You follow their gaze. No comet, no eagle, just a pair of birds circling lazily above. A man in a crimson-trimmed toga holds up a crooked staff and shouts, "They flew left! An omen!" The crowd murmurs. Some nod sagely. Others yawn. You've stumbled into the world of the augurs, priest officials who interpret the will of the gods by watching birds. Their system is oddly precise. Left means one thing, right means another. Number, species, wing angle, all factors in divine decision-making. You realize half these people probably aren't even here for the birds. It's just good morning theatre. You duck out before the augur starts a full monologue on sparrow behavior and find yourself near a tiny altar where someone has left a cake shaped like a boar. A child darts past and takes a bite. No one stops him. Honestly, not even the gods would judge. As you walk, you notice something. Rome isn't just blanketed with temples. It's soaked in the sacred. Every crossroad, every milestone, every spring or old tree has a deity clinging to it. Romans lived in a world where the divine wasn't distant. It was embedded in the oven, in the threshold, in the grain stored under your bed. And this belief extended into the strangest corners. Ever heard of Cloacina, goddess of the sewer? That's right. She oversaw the cleanliness of Rome's wastewater system. The idea being, if you're going to dump things into the sacred river, you'd better ask politely. Then there's Bonus Eventus, the god of good outcomes. That's it. Just vague success. You find a small statue of him by a dice game, in an alley. A gambler lights a candle and mutters something that sounds suspiciously like a threat disguised as a prayer. You pass a small procession now. A priest leads the way, followed by a few women in white tunics carrying baskets of fruit and flowers. They sing softly as they go, weaving through the streets like smoke. You don't know what god they're honoring. Frankly, you stop trying to keep track after the sixth minor deity of mold-resistant grain. One elderly man, spotting your curious expression, smiles and says, "We worship them all, just in case." And that's probably the best summary of Roman religion you'll ever hear. As you move away from the sacred hills and winding rituals, something subtle shifts. The city feels lighter, looser, like it has exhaled. You stop by a fountain and wash your hands, watching the ripples. A small coin glints at the bottom, an offering, or just a lost wish. You lean back against a wall, sun now full on your face, and reflect. This wasn't just about gods. It was about keeping the world in balance. Romans lived by ritual the way others lived by law or luck. And maybe, just maybe, they found comfort in the fact that if you burned the right thing, whispered the right words, and tossed a coin just so, the universe might listen. You close your eyes for a moment, the sound of sandals on stone growing distant. Just one more chapter now, a soft fade to sleep. And now, just before your eyelids grow too heavy, before the final stretch of your ancient wanderings slips into dreams, you arrive at something deeper, something quieter. Home. Not a villa with columns or a marble-tiled atrium. Not a banquet hall lit with oil lamps and packed with silk-clad elites. This home is simpler, smaller, nestled along a narrow cobbled lane between a bakery and a dyer's shop. The kind of place where laughter echoes down from open windows, where neighbors know your name, and where life is slow enough to notice when a fig tree bears its first fruit of the season. You duck through a wooden doorway. It creaks the way old doors do, not unpleasant, more like a sleepy yawn. Inside, the walls are painted in modest reds and ochres, with fading frescoes of flowers. birds, maybe even a clumsy little Venus who's seen better centuries. There's a low table, a rough stool, and in the corner, a clay lamp flickering its final breath of olive oil. This is where the real Rome lives. Not in the gold and grandeur, but in the intimate daily rhythms that never made it into epic poems. You sit beside the hearth, a blackened hole in the brick floor, and imagine it glowing with fire earlier that night. A stew of lentils, perhaps, with barley and wild onions. A thin loaf of bread pulled from the coals. A jug of watered wine, barely alcoholic, but just enough to dull the edge of a long day. The bed is in the next room, or more accurately, the room. A platform of wood and straw, draped in a linen sheet, slightly itchy. You settle into it now, pulling a woolen blanket up to your chest. Outside, somewhere beyond the shuttered window, a dog barks once and then gives up. You can hear it all, the entire city, muffled and slowed. A wagon wheel bumping over stones. A sleepy lullaby hummed by a mother across the alley. The clink of a cup being set down for the night. And maybe, if you're lucky, the faintest echo of footsteps, sandals brushing quietly across stone. Someone else wandering. Another ghost in the empire. This is where Rome ends for you, at least tonight. Not in triumph or tragedy, but in stillness. In the realization that ancient life wasn't always thunderous speeches and blood in the arena. Sometimes it was quiet moments like this. A blanket, a candle, a full belly and a sore back. Breathing in a city that, despite its chaos, held space for ordinary comfort. Historians still argue whether daily Roman life was unbearable or enviable, whether their evenings were steeped in anxiety or wrapped in routine. But you know now that it was both and neither. It was just life. Different names, different gods, same beating heart. So let your body sink now. The bed shifts slightly, under your weight. The air cools as night presses closer. Your arms are heavy. Your breathing slows. The oil lamp sputters once, then fades. Wind down, 300 words. And now, as we settle gently into the softest silence, let everything begin to drift. The noise of the city, those clattering hooves, that marketplace hum, the belly-deep laughter from bathhouse halls, fades like morning mist slipping off a tiled roof. Even the smell of roasted chestnuts and vinegar wine, of dusty scrolls and warm bread. It lingers just at the edge of memory, comforting, like a familiar dream returning for one last visit. The gods too grow quiet. Jupiter softens his frown. Minerva closes her heavy eyes. Even Mars, eternal in his armor, finally leans his head against a stone column and allows the hush to seep in. You are not walking anymore, not wandering, not waiting. You're still, tucked beneath woven wool and dim candlelight. The stories of Rome, its emperors, its poets, its pie sellers and street dancers, continue on without you now, but you don't need to chase them. You've seen enough, felt enough. You've lived an entire day in the sandals of someone long, long gone. And now, it's time to let go. Let the stone streets blur. Let the glow of temple fires fade. Let even the memory of the sponge on a stick dissolve into oblivion. Your breath is the only sound now, slow, deep, soft as fog. And as your mind floats between here and elsewhere, know this: you were part of it. For one long, strange, wonderful night, you were Roman. So rest, dream gently, and may your sleep be blessed by the quiet gods. And may your sleep be blessed by the quiet gods.